Optimal minimalism.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I answer your personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
Tim Ferriss Show.
This episode is brought to you by AG1, the daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. And I do get asked a lot what I would take if I could only take one supplement. And the true answer is invariably AG1. It simply covers a ton of bases. I usually drink it in the mornings and frequently take their travel packs with me on the road. So what is AG1? AG1 is a science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food sourced nutrients. In a single scoop, AG1 gives you support for the brain, gut, and immune system. So take ownership of your health and try AG1 today. You will get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription purchase. So learn more, check it out. Go to drinkag1.com/Tim. That's drinkag1, the number 1, drinkag1.com/Tim. Last time, drinkag1.com/Tim. Check it out. Hello, boys and girls. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, where it is my job to deconstruct world-class performers, to tease out the habits, routines, belief systems, etc. that you can apply to your own lives. And this episode was extremely fun. It took place in the middle of nowhere, effectively, on Easter Island, very hard place to get to. And you could think of it in a sense as my life extension pilgrimage for a whole host of reasons. And I was surrounded by 3 incredibly brilliant people, and I'm going to describe each in turn. The first is Navdeep, goes by Navdeep Chandel, PhD. I'm going to butcher some pronunciation here because I don't know how to read some of these words, but he's a David W. Cudgel, I believe, Cuggell, professor of medicine and cell biology within the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University. Nav is extremely good at questioning assumptions, testing assumptions, as are the other people I'm going to mention. And I'm just going to give you one example. Many of you listening probably take antioxidants, and here is a description of interests on Nav's faculty profile. And I'm going to blaze through this, but I do think it's really fascinating and just kind of opens the door to discussions that many people are not having. Here we go. Historically, reactive oxygen species, ROS, have been thought to be cellular damaging agents lacking a physiological function. This is why many of us, this is Tim's voice now, take antioxidants, right? We want to snuff out these reactive oxygen species. Back to Nav. Accumulation of ROS and oxidative damage have been linked to multiple pathologies, including neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, cancer, and premature aging. This guilt by association relationship left a picture of ROS as a necessary evil of oxidative metabolism, a product of an imperfect system. Yet, few biological systems possess such flagrant imperfections thanks to the persistent optimization of evolution. And it appears that oxidative metabolism is no different. More and more evidence suggests that low levels of ROS are critical for healthy cellular function. And in his lab, he says, we are testing whether mitochondrial release of H2O2, that's hydrogen peroxide, has evolved as a method of communication between mitochondrial function and other cellular processes to maintain homeostasis, example given, stem cell function and immune responses, and promote adaptation to stress, example given, hypoxia. So this is very much a counter view to what you would find in media. And for that reason, and many, many others, I enjoyed hanging out with Nav. Now, his partner in crime comes up next. And his partner in crime, one of his best friends, is David Sabatini, MD, PhD. You can find him on Twitter at DM Sabatini, Sabatini. He's a member of the Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research, investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, professor of biology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known as MIT, and a senior associate member at the Broad Institute. David is on, you could think of it as a shortlist for the Nobel Prize, at least according to Reuters, for his work in elucidating the role of rapamycin and something called mTOR, which we're going to talk a lot about. And for those of you out there who have thought a lot about life extension and looked for silver bullets, you've probably come across metformin and rapamycin. Well, in these two gents, Nav and David, you have respectively two of the world's foremost experts in how, say, metformin and rapamycin function. Next up, we have one of my faves. He's been on the podcast at least twice before, Peter Attia, MD. You can find him on Twitter at Peter Attia, MD, ATTIA, eatingacademy.com. He is a former ultra endurance athlete, swimming races at 25 miles and crazy stuff like that. Compulsive self-experimenter like yours truly, and one of the most fascinating human beings that I know. He makes my OCD look like a light case. He is also one of my go-to doctors for anything performance or longevity related. Peter earned his MD from Stanford and holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering and Applied Mathematics from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Did his residency in general surgery at Johns Hopkins and conducted research at the National Cancer Institute under Dr. Steven Rosenberg, where Peter focused on the role of regulatory T cells in cancer regression and other immune-based therapies for cancer. And we get into a lot in this wine-infused jam session on Easter Island, and I try to guide it best I can. I had a fair amount of wine, as did one or two others perhaps in the group. We discuss antioxidants, their role or lack thereof. We get into all sorts of serious stuff. We also talk about, and might even have an impersonation of Borat, talk about what is ass crack voting exactly, how to staple, that's courtesy of Peter Attia, fonts, and a supplement that many of you have asked about, which is Basis, and I believe the company is called Elysium. So there you have it, folks. Sorry for the long intro, but I felt the context would be important. These guys are absolutely brilliant, and I was playing catch up the entire trip, but that is how you grow. You got to be the weakest person in the room sometime. All right, I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I enjoyed recording it. Thanks for listening. All right, folks, here we are on Easter Island, Isla de Pascua, of all places, and we have a number of folks here, one doing something obscene with his hands. I'm not going to mention who. And we're going to start with some introductions. We have one known character, two new faces. Nav, would you mind introducing your friend, David?
Well, Tim, I want to thank you for inviting me to your wonderful podcast in this lovely, magical place called Easter Island. I'm here with my good friend, David Sabatini, who's a professor at Massachusetts Institution of Technology. Institute? What did I say? Institution? Whatever. It's MIT.
Not an insane asylum.
What can I tell you? That's what friends do. They correct each other all the time. In his case, he just corrects me. Anyways, David is a professor at MIT, and David made a remarkable discovery about 20 years ago. She hasn't discovered anything after that, but it was remarkable 20 years ago. And that was on a serious note, which was he figured out what's called a protein called mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. Rapamycin, and we'll get in a lot into this, was actually found in Easter Island. And for David, this is kind of like a pilgrimage to, sort of pay homage and other things to, this great little molecule called rapamycin. And obviously, we're going to talk a lot about what all these magical things rapamycin could possibly do.
Fantastic. And just so you guys realize, since it may not be obvious at first listen, these two have known each other for a very, very long time. So the way that Peter and I bust each other's balls, you may hear occasional busting of balls between these two. David?
Sure. So thanks, Tim. I also want to thank you and also Peter for Peter actually was the person who took an incipient idea and had this actually happen for us to all be here. So Navdeep Chandal, I've known him, I don't know, probably maybe 10, 15 years, somewhere in that range. He's a professor at Northwestern in Chicago. He is, I think, my best friend in science. He has worked in an area of biology. Actually, he started working in area biology that frankly, a lot of people were not that interested in for a long time. And these are these things called mitochondria inside our cells. And sometimes probably people have heard of them as the powerhouses of the cell because they make a molecule called ATP, which is an energy molecule. And Nav, I think it's safe to say, was the first person who realized that these really important compartments in the cell did a lot of other things. And this idea that they're so-called signaling organelles really initiated with Nav. These are now very popular things to study, and Nav was there at the beginning to do that. He's also one of the most charming people in science. He is friends with everyone. He's the social butterfly of all meetings, and really a meeting without Nav is no fun.
Strikes an incredible resemblance to a Bollywood star.
I thought you were going to say Julie from the Love Boat, the cruise director, as he just sort of pointed out. But,
true.
Nav. I'll take the Bollywood star.
Yeah, the ones who don't get the girls, usually. Right?
So, Peter, how did you come to know these two guys?
So I've known David for a few years. We actually met. I don't actually remember who introduced us, but kind of took an interest in trying to better understand how inhibition of this thing that Nav alluded to, mTOR, could be valuable in the treatment of cancer. And about a year and a half ago, we were having dinner, and he mentioned that one of the things he always wanted to do was have a meeting on Easter Island to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the elucidation of how rapamycin works. So I guess, as Nav alluded to, we'll talk a little bit about that, or maybe a lot about that. And so this idea kind of seemed amazing to me because I thought the story of rapamycin's discovery, which I'm sure we'll get told at some point this evening, was about one of the most interesting stories in science, not just from the standpoint of the expedition, the isolation of the molecule or identification of it, but also how close it came to never happening. And then to the story of how its mechanism of action was identified independently by different groups. And, the story of how David did it at such a young age is kind of amazing to me. So David and I kind of crafted this idea about a year ago, which was we'd come to Easter Island to scope it out, to basically see first and foremost where Rapa was discovered, but also to figure out if there was a way to have a conference here. That idea quickly took hold, and then I think I just talked you into it, and that took about, 10 to 11 seconds. And I think David similarly talked Nav into it, and that
took 11 minutes.
11 minutes, yeah. So that's what got us here.
He wanted to share a room with me, and I made sure that did not happen once I disabused him of that.
So Peter, you've told me before, and I kind of ask you to retell it like a bedtime story because I like it so much. And of course, everybody can jump in at any point, but the lore of and connection between where we are, Easter Island, otherwise known as Rapa Nui, and rapamycin.
Yeah, so in 1964, an expedition from McGill University set out. They, I believe, arrived on the island in early December of 64, and they spent, probably half a year here?
No.
Dude, you just watched a movie about it last night.
Yeah, YouTube wasn't working. It took like an hour to get through the first 4 minutes of the documentary. I think I know less now than I did before we tried to watch it. Rapa Nui is great for many things. Connectivity is not one of them. So this group returned to McGill University, and by about 1972, I believe, the soil that contained a Streptomyces. Which one was it, David? Streptomyces hydrocopicus, yeah.
They had collected near a volcano here.
That's right, which we saw the first day we got here, which was mind-boggling. This made its way into the hand of a chemist named Suren Sehgal, Sehgal, who was at a biotech company that is no longer in existence.
Another Bollywood star.
It was based at a pharma company called Irst.
Yeah, Irst. That had offices around the country, but he was in the Montreal office. He spent I think, the next 3 years purifying the compound, the active compound within this, which he named rapamycin. Rapa obviously paying respect to the island on which it was discovered, mycin being sort of the thing we'd add to the name of something that was an antimicrobial agent.
What was the lore among the locals, or the purported background of this volcano?
So the word on the street, which was reiterated to us this week, was that
more than once, actually, right?
Yeah,
Independently.
Anytime natives were sick, the local, the Rapa Nui, they would go and spend an evening in the marsh area of the volcano, and it would seem to rid them of all their ails. Now, in truth, it's not clear to me that that's why they were prospecting there. I think they were looking for biodiversity, but it certainly makes for a great story. So the story gets interesting back in Montreal when, this happened sometime between 1975 and 1980. I don't know the exact details, but this company went through a series of layoffs. The majority of the people in Montreal were basically released. Suren was one of the few who was not. He was transferred to the New Jersey office. However, he was ordered to destroy all non-viable compounds, of which rapamycin was one. Now, he'd already figured out something pretty remarkable about rapamycin, which is it was a potent inhibitor of yeast. As the story goes, he believed this was going to be a game-changing drug for athlete's foot. I don't think at the time, David, they really understood its full anti-proliferative effects, did they?
No, but it was pretty early. They started seeing things in human cells too, right? In immune cells.
So Suren and his son, Ajay, who was actually supposed to be on this trip with us, so it's super sad that he had a work commitment and he couldn't make it here. They actually packaged up the rapamycin into little dry ice containers and manually, wouldn't even let the movers do it. They were the ones that physically brought it to New Jersey, where it sat in their freezer for almost a decade. It wasn't until Wyeth bought this company in 84 or 85 that Suren approached his new bosses and said, "Hey, I've had this compound I was working on a decade ago. Do you mind if I get back to it?" To which they said, "Knock yourself out." And that really began the new birth of rapamycin, which, as David said, really went on to show these remarkable anti-proliferative properties, and in particular was really potent against a type of immune cell called T cells, which is what ultimately led to its FDA approval in 1999 for the treatment of kidney rejection.
But it had been so long since rapamycin was discovered. Actually, the patent on the chemical entity, which is the most valuable kind of patent you can have, had expired at that point. So it was really a use patent that they could get. And people would criticize Wyeth that how could it possibly have taken, I forget what patents were, 17 years at that point. So it was an incredibly long story to get clinical utility.
How did you connect with rapamycin?
Yeah, so that's a bit of a long-winded, maybe complicated story. So I was a student at Johns Hopkins, and I was an MD PhD student. And I went into the lab of probably one of the most prominent scientists at Hopkins, a man who's still well. His name is Solomon Snyder. And Sol is a real character in science. He was a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, pharmacologist. And when I got to that lab, it was an interesting lab because he gave you, or at least he gave me, a lot of freedom. So basically let me do whatever I wanted to do. And so that was great, but at the same time, very nerve-wracking.
How did you choose his lab? Why did you want to go to his lab?
It was pretty simple. It was a lab that lots of other students like me, I was an MD PhD student, so a joint student, lots of students went. It had a reputation of having lots of smart people in it. And I also think that it had a reputation for people getting out of that lab fairly quickly. I mean, it was sort of a work hard, play hard type of lab. So mostly it was my friends were there, which, as I tell a lot of my students, it's important to have a social environment in the lab. But I tried a lot of things in that lab that didn't work. And one day I realized that they were working with this other drug called FK506, which Peter and Nav know pretty well, has some structural similarity to rapamycin. And the reason they were using it is they were just using it as a control.
They were using rapamycin as the control.
As a control, exactly. So they were working with this other FK506, which is also an immunosuppressant. They were doing these things in neurons, but they needed a control. And they're sort of using a related drug, which is a fairly typical thing to do. And I realized two things. One is that we had rapamycin, which at the time you couldn't buy. And I'll tell you how we had rapamycin. and two, that from what I read about it, it was at least as interesting and probably a lot more interesting than FK506, and we didn't know how it worked. And the reason we had it is, and this goes back to the story Peter told, is that Saul was a very prominent person. And so when he saw in the literature a molecule he liked, a drug molecule, particularly a molecule that was very potent, which basically means it acted at very low concentrations, he would typically write whoever reported that and say, I'm Saul Snyder, and it'd be great to get a sample of your drug. In this case, he had written Suren Segal, who came up earlier. And Suren, who I unfortunately never met, was incredibly nice and sent us a ridiculous amount of rapamycin, which, technically at that point was priceless because it was not purchasable. But when it did become purchasable, I calculated at one point the street price would have been like $10 million or something.
Wow. The amount that he sent you.
The amount that he sent us, which at some point we actually lost, which was a little bit bad. But the more important thing he sent, which again, you have to remember, this was before there was a lot of sort of electronic papers. It wasn't that easy necessarily to search things online. That was pretty primitive. He sent us a book with it that said Rapamycin Bibliography, which he had put this little note that just said perhaps of interest. And basically this book had everything ever published on this drug, which again reignited my interest in sort of the molecule, because there was a lot of cool things. And most of these were abstracts. These were sort of little, actually mostly from meetings where people had reported little things about this drug. So that's how I started working on it. So I decided, well, why not try to figure out how this drug works?
And for a lay audience, maybe we can get a little technical, of course, and we probably will, but what are the most interesting potential applications or applications of rapamycin in humans?
Well, yeah, so they're the established...
Wait, can I just interrupt? I think that's a great question, but just to put it in the larger context of biology, so what David did as a graduate student was to discover the target of rapamycin. So in other words, what does rapamycin bind to? What protein? That protein, today we call it mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. Now, I was a graduate student at the same time that David was at the University of Chicago. I think I had heard of mTOR, and I was working on mitochondria and metabolism, but not really caring about mTOR. But, you look back now over what's happened in the last 20 years, mTOR unequivocally is the most dominant player in regulating metabolism. What does that mean? You think of nucleotide synthesis, lipids, right? DNA, how you make DNA, how you make RNA, how you make new lipids, how do you make amino acids, all of that stuff, mTOR controls. And also, mTOR itself is sensitive to changes in amino acids, growth factors, has a lot of different inputs, oxygen, and perhaps even glucose. So this thing is really an integrator of, you can think of like nutritional things, keep it simple, and also how it outputs things like what you make, lipids, DNA, RNA. It is clearly the most dominant player in the world of metabolism. And that's, so that's a big deal, right? That's like saying the equivalent of that, some protein that regulates gene expressions, right? And there's a very famous one like MYC. It doesn't matter, but so it's at that level. It's one of the big proteins that's ever been discovered in the field of biology. So you can't, underestimate David's contribution in biology, because it's a big deal. And now you have a drug called rapamycin that can affect this major player that regulates metabolism. And if you think metabolism is the key to understanding many diseases out there, including diabetes, which is unfortunately rampant in the United States, cancer, lots of things. If you buy into that larger idea that metabolism holds the key to understanding many diseases, the big ones, atherosclerosis, neurodegeneration, autoimmunity, then you have to talk about mTOR and rapamycin, and that's, probably David's legacy.
And just to revisit a term you mentioned a few times, because I know the word metabolism is perhaps overused in many different contexts.
There's a simple definition of it.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. That's what I'm going to ask you. What should people how should people define metabolism?
My simplest definition comes actually from my daughter, Anjali. I always tell this story. When she was little, she's going to be 15 next week. I asked her, what do you think of metabolism? She said, isn't that when you grow things or you break down food? And so what does that mean? The act of growth we call anabolism. So that's half of the equation in the metabolism field. And the other one is breaking down food, which is catabolism. So metabolism is a sum of either anabolism and catabolism, either taking food and making stuff, muscles, for example, or breaking food so you have enough energy to use those muscles and go on, Ironman triathlons like our friend Peter Attia does all the time. Just for fun, including this week, as I've observed myself.
The Tahiti swim.
The Tahiti swim.
Side note, we'll go to the beach.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, we're going to take a quick swim. And
Well, I don't even swim.
Where's
so,
Peter? And then it seems like he's en route to Tahiti, and we see him about an hour later.
Well, actually, here there's a Birdman competition historically, and Peter can describe exactly what that competition had to do with. But so I've nicknamed him the Birdman now. That's his official new nickname, the Birdman.
We call Tim G.I. Joe, though, right?
Well, yeah. Well, that's more
Just
obvious.
you guys know.
By the way, David, when you and Tim were on the same flight down here, what was your first observation of Tim on the plane?
Oh, that was hilarious. So I had I think I'd briefly seen who you were, so I had some hint of what I was looking for. But I was changed from a flight from Houston into one from Miami. And so there's this guy in front of me, obviously quite buff. He keeps getting out of his seat. He opens some big luggage, always in the middle. And we were lucky to be in business class, but people couldn't cross like on the aisle. He opens it and he's taking a lot of pills. And he seems like a very high maintenance man, I have to say. Like things are coming out, taking out. And the poor flight attendant trying to cross, and he doesn't really care. He's still just
didn't have anywhere to
looking
put it.
for bottles and bottles. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's a little bit of nutty. I was like, I wonder if that's Tim
I
Ferriss.
think the official term is freak show.
Freak show. And I thought in my head, I hope it's not actually. But then when I landed, then I found from Peter that, because I assumed since you were coming from California you're on the same flight as Peter, but he's like, no, he's on the Miami flight. So I was like, oh my God, that guy.
That's the guy.
That's him. But so can I say my definition of what mTOR does?
Yes,
Since
please.
I give talks on this all the time. I think Nav put it in a very good way. It's a very simple thing. It senses whether there's nutrients in the environment, and it decides whether our body is catabolic or anabolic. It makes that decision. And the reason it does so many things is that we don't think about this in our lives because if anything, we're overfed, or at least most people are overfed. But if you think in our evolutionary history, the life of most animals out there, food scarcity is likely the rule. And likely we went through boom and bust periods, right? You might kill an animal, eat for a bit of time, and then really go into a bit of a fast or prolonged fast. And so this is this protein that's making the decision and knowing which state you're in and all of your physiology, right? From your fertility to whether your muscles are growing to, even hair growth, all of these things should be controlled whether you're in a nutrient rich or nutrient poor environment. So that's the way I like to think about it.
So I have a question actually for now. You're
not going to tell about the Birdman competition?
We'll talk about that.
Let's cover Birdman real quick.
All right,
The Birdman.
but
It's
I'm
one of the
going to come back to a
interesting
question
things
about
about Easter
autophagy.
Island.
But okay, so the Birdman competition is kind of this thing that I think the moment we heard about it, we all decided we wanted to do.
No. First of all, I don't
No.
swim. Let's be clear about
Peter
that.
wanted to do it very
Only
bad.
Peter wanted to do it, okay?
No, I have to say I was tempted.
You would do it.
I would, well, I might not because I would die, but I would be tempted to do it.
I don't think I can do it justice to describe because it's hard to explain what Easter Island looks like. But maybe we could post a couple pictures of this or something.
It's
but
a cliff you have to jump
there's like
off
what
and
I don't know how
die.
high is
Yeah,
that
like
cliff?
that.
It's got to be 100 meters, 150 meters.
Yeah, probably 150, 200
All right, so
meters,
you
yeah.
picture a 150 to 200 meter vertical wall,
Which is the side.
which is the side
outside of a
the
volcano.
of one of the points. It's basically a triangle shaped island, and then about a kilometer out, you have one and a half kilometers out,
yeah.
you have two small rocks, which are just more pieces of lava. In the Birdman competition, the athletes would start at the top, scale down the 200-meter cliff. And again, I don't know how anybody did that without dying. Swim out to the island, climb up it, which itself looks almost impossible, get one of the eggs of the bird. Now, what was the name of the bird?
It was a tern, but
some sort of a bird. And then you had
which apparently
to,
no longer exists.
using a piece of cloth, strap the egg to your forehead, swim back, climb the 200-meter cliff, and you would present that egg to the leader of your village or tribe, and he would then become, I don't know, the de facto ruler of
And we saw
for the year.
Yeah, for the next year.
At the quarry, though, apparently he also got that extraordinarily small house that we were at,
Exactly.
remember?
So you were going to ask about autophagy, but before we get to autophagy, because this may be, well, I'm sure it'll come up many times, but again, just for people who may not, like me, have a biochemistry background, what are some of the most interesting potential applications of rapamycin?
Yeah, so the first one was this antifungal potential use. That actually never took off, interestingly enough. So that it never got approved for that. But the first thing it was approved for was organ transplants, right? And particularly kidney transplants. And so you need to suppress the immune system. And that was the first major use.
So that your body doesn't reject it.
Doesn't reject it, exactly. And more recently, actually, was approved actually for pancreatic islet transplants, so the insulin-producing cells. It had a lot of use in cardiology and these things called stents, where you open up coronary vessels. And then more recently as an anti-cancer agent. So those are all, FDA approved clinical trials validate the use of the molecule. At one point, the cardiology one was actually a major market from an economic point of view. The aspect of it that has been tantalizing and probably the reason we're having this conversation and certainly the reason that Peter got interested in it is that starting some time ago, first actually in worms, in very small worms called C. elegans, it was actually found that inhibiting this system, the mTOR pathway, increased lifespan.
By how much?
It depends. 20%, 30%, 15, 30%.
But a non-trivial amount.
A non-trivial amount if you extrapolate to our lifespans. These are organisms that live, in the order of a week to 10 days type of thing. And then it was validated in yeast, which of course single-cell organisms, and then it was validated in mice, which are obviously much more similar to us. And so that captivated a lot of people's attention. And I think it's fair to say that of all the molecules that have been shown to have an effect on lifespan, this is probably the best validated in the sense that multiple different investigators have done. Lifespan studies are notoriously fickle. Multiple people have done this one. It's been done in multiple organisms that span a large evolutionary range, right, from a single cell yeast to a mammal. And so this is, captivated people's attention as to whether it would have that impact in us, right? Obviously, a next to impossible clinical trial to do in a human being, but it is now being done by people like Matt Kaeberlein in dogs, and so that's potentially quite exciting.
And now part of what makes, we're going to bounce around a lot. That's just the nature of how these things go. So the study, including or using dogs that you just mentioned, is not part of what makes that interesting. That these dogs are not, say, a single breed that have been raised specifically for lab purposes.
Exactly. So I think there's a couple aspects that make it interesting. So one, you could, if you wanted to be cynical about the mouse studies, which are so far the ones that have been done the most by multiple labs, we've even done them. If you want to be cynical, you say, well, these are mice living in a cage. They're completely inbred. They're bored out of their minds. They're probably overeating. These are the equivalent of a couch potato type of human. And sure, it's helping them. But what if you had a mouse that was living in the wild, was entertained, right? Things that it would be very different than this kind of mouse. And so the reason that the dog study is interesting is first, it's many breeds. So it's not just a type of inbred mouse strain. And these are dogs living with people. So they're going to be in many different environments. And presumably they're going to have more entertainment and exercise than these mice did. So my fear of the mouse studies is, okay, are we just treating chubby, bored, depressed mice, and okay, it's helping them. But if they weren't that, maybe it wouldn't help them.
Right. In so much as if you're treating the Homer Simpson meets, inbred fill in the blank. I'm blanking on this movie. Why am I blanking? No. Help me out. Banjo playing. Oh, God. Horrible.
Oh,
joke,
Deliverance?
I'm not gonna, yes.
Deliverance.
Like the Homer Simpson meets Deliverance of mice. you may see
Squeal like a pig?
Exactly, squeal like a pig. If you might see a large improvement in, say, a whatever n of 10 of these mice, but if you have the Peter Attia of mice, you might not see.
Right. And of course, we could help the mice by making them exercise, right? So it wouldn't be something so unique. So if it works in the dogs, I think that will be quite a sort of milestone moment.
But David, lifespan is one output, but the other one that you and I always talk about, and Peter's a big fan of this, and he can probably comment a little bit more about this, is health span, right? And I think perhaps for the audience, it might be worth just discussing, and maybe Peter or David can talk about what does lifespan versus health span mean. I mean, and again, there's a philosophical debate about how much you weigh health span versus lifespan. In other words, how healthy you live, but you still die at, as a male at 85, let's say, or you live, but you die like at 110 and perhaps not so healthy those last 20 years. So Peter?
Yeah, I think about this problem a lot just clinically because I think the way you've described it is what everybody's concern is, right? My practice focuses on longevity, but most people misinterpret that to be lifespan only, which is the mathematical elongation or extension of number of years of life, which, if the quality of that life does not get extended, most people would not opt for that. So sort of think about life.
That's true.
No, I'm saying most people are afraid of that, right? Most people say there's no value to me if my expected lifespan is 79 years and you're going to make it, you could make it 85, but I'm continuing to deteriorate in my quality. That's not what I want. Most people feel that way.
Right. And so it has been shown that if you do look at metrics of health in mice, many, but certainly not all, are affected by rapamycin. And there are even now some...
In a positive way.
In a positive way. And the study that got the most interest, which is in people and elderly people, looking at immune function using a derivative of rapamycin that works the same way, but is slightly chemically different from a company called Novartis, also caused...
That was the turning point that's the moment which we all have these moments when we kind of like the light bulb goes off, but that was December 24th, 2014. I still have my copy of the paper, which still has embargo stamped on it because I got it on the 23rd. So it said, basically for 24 hours, you can't do anything with this paper.
But just for the audience, again, one of the major issues as we age is our ability to fight infections decreases, right? So in other words, the immune system is not as robust as we age. And what this study suggested is that perhaps by taking rapamycin, not early in life, actually quite late, given to these elderly people, it allowed you to boost your immune system, and that could potentially translate into fighting infections like the common flu, which many elderly get, right?
Yeah, this study was remarkable, right? Because people, I think at this point, David, it's safe to say people realized, because it was really 2009 when the sort of landmark mice studies were coming online, but you still had this 5-year gap where people said, yes, so what? It extends life, but at what cost? These are laboratory animals. They don't have the same infectious risks. This is, you're going to trade one problem for the other. What this study did was it took, and it's a relatively small study, 50 to 60 people per arm. It was a 4-arm study. They were 65 years.
What do you mean by arm?
So there were 4 groups of people randomized into 4 groups. Each group is called an arm. There were, like I said, somewhere between 50 and 60 people in each group or arm. And there was a placebo group, so they were giving nothing. The next group was given 0.5 milligrams of this Rapalog or rapamycin analog every day. The next group was given 5 milligrams once a week. And the final group was given 20 milligrams once a week. The primary outcome, and by the way, they were only treated for 6 weeks. Then there was a 2-week washout, which means you get none of the drug. And then the vaccinations began. What the study actually measured is the response to vaccination, which would be a pretty decent proxy in a sample size this small for infection response. And the gist of it, it's been a while since I've actually read the paper, but I remember knowing every detail of it at one point. The gist of it is that the patients treated with rapamycin or the Rapalog all had a better immune response than the controls.
what was the difference or the differences between the dosage range and the dosing schedule?
Yeah, I was worried you were going to ask that. I don't remember it for the immune response. I do remember it for the side effects. Do you remember what the immune response looked like?
I think all of them.
They all had a benefit
all
over
had a
placebo, but I don't remember which one.
I don't know where it plateaued. I don't remember either.
Yeah, the most common side effect, to my recollection, was the mouth sores, which we certainly saw a lot of in transplant patients. So transplant patients, a kidney transplant patient, which is, when I was in residency, we used to give rapamycin out like it was water. I think we were giving patients somewhere between 1 and 2 milligrams a day. It was about the right dose. And certainly one of the more common side effects were these aphthous ulcers. I'm assuming, although I assume it's just because mucosal cells are so proliferative that when you're giving a drug that inhibits proliferation, we're going to see deterioration of those cells. And so certainly the ulcers were probably the most common side effect. And they seem
certainly what people would complain the most about.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely. At some point, we should remember to come back to finish the story of Suren, because there's actually kind of an interesting story there, which we should come back to at some point. But just what you said made me think of that. But there was definitely a dose response to side effects, right? So
Sorry to yank. I've had an audio complication, so Pete and I are sharing a mic. What is the logic or rationale behind intermittent dosing of rapamycin?
I'm going to give you the short answer. David will give you the long answer. The other thing David did was he figured out that there were basically two complexes for mTOR. So mTOR, if it organized around a protein called Raptor, was known as mTOR complex 1 or mTORC1. If mTOR organized around a protein called Richter, it was mTORC2 or mTOR complex 2. The thinking behind intermittent dosing versus constitutive dosing, where you just give it constantly, is intermittently you can target mTORC1 and not cross over to mTORC2. And I'll let David say more on that, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah. So I think that's certainly true, because it's clear, but from genetic studies largely, inhibiting mTORC2 is not a good thing. But I would add the other thing that intermittent dosing might allow you to do, and I think this is going to be increased.
Sorry to interrupt. Intermittent dosing, does that mean once per week? Does that mean once every other day? What would that hypothetically look like?
It could mean anything. It basically means that at some point, the drug in your blood goes to a very, let's say, ineffectual dose, right? So that you basically are relieving the inhibition of mTOR caused by rapamycin, as opposed to a continuous dosing where you basically want to always have it inhibited, which in many cases is what pharmacologists might try to actually optimize around, is to keep that inhibition. Although there's been quite a bit of I would say, ground change in how people are thinking about this in many fields. In this case, if you look at the function of mTOR in many different tissues, it's quite clear that it's an essential protein. And what I mean by that is if you knock it out in a particular tissue, that tissue dies. How about the muscle? It's very clear, and really almost every tissue. In contrast, if you hyperactivate it, that is, turn it on to a very high level, the tissue also suffers. And so this is an example where too little is bad, too much is bad. It's really in between. And so you need to basically figure out a way where you're going to let, at some point, let's say the muscle actually have its mTOR and do the things, which, as Nav said, is going to be anabolic, make muscle. But at other points, you want to be able to inhibit the system, and that's actually going to drive this catabolism. And many people think that it's this catabolic process that's why it has these anti-aging processes. And very simplistically, and I would say that this is conceptually interesting, but probably not well proven. The idea that is if you make a cell, like a muscle cell, degrade lots of its components and force it to remake them, if there was things that were messed up, that had aged, that were defective, you might clean them up and replace them with good things, right? So a bit like cleaning house. And so this cycle of anabolism and catabolism, which we think is what the pathway normally does in response to food, right, or absence of food, you might actually want to mimic that with rapamycin as well. So inhibit, cause the cells to clean house by degrading lots of stuff. But now you got to remake stuff, right? You can't just clean house and throw everything out and not make things. And so you also need to let the system rebuild. And so intermittent dosing would let you do that.
So just for the audience, and it's actually this concept that David just talked about, this clearing up of perhaps of damaged goods in your muscle or in your body is a process called autophagy. And just last week, the Nobel Prize was given for the discovery of autophagy to a Japanese scientist.
Yeah, not the discovery, the genetic analysis.
Sorry,
Remember,
the genetic analysis.
Did you
Sorry.
discover?
Autophagy meaning eating itself or eating yourself.
Auto eating.
Auto eating.
Exactly.
Sorry. The molecular basis of and the genetics really of autophagy, but the actual observation was done almost in the 70s or 60s.
Probably, yes.
Yeah, by
probably.
Christian Devaux, who also won a Nobel Prize for a different thing. So, in other words, an mTOR is controlling this process when you inhibit it. That's a fair statement, right, David?
Yeah, it normally suppresses autophagy, so it prevents catabolism because it's in a high nutrient state. So when you inhibit mTOR, you eat yourself.
Do you think, David, that many of the beneficial effects of rapamycin is because rapamycin inhibits mTOR and that then activates autophagy?
There are certainly studies in worm that suggest that.
What about in higher organisms?
I don't think there's any that have done that yet.
Do you have a good explanation as to why rapamycin might have a positive effect on health span and lifespan then?
I personally like.
You like the
that
autophagy?
I like the idea.
Oh, you do like
it's
it.
never
Okay.
been tested.
So I have a question, one for each of you guys. David, does intermittent dosing is it plausible that, using big words because I feel intellectually insecure, let me try something easier. So does intermittent dosing of rapamycin in any way mimic fasting, going through sort of feast and famine phases?
I think it very well could. And I think the issue is that none of us really fast. If you really think about it, right? If you have dinner at 6, you get up at 6, a 12-hour fast is probably not that big a deal for any of us, particularly if you've got a little bit of extra, heft on you. And so I don't think as sort of modern humans, we probably ever fast, right? And so in a way, when you're giving rapamycin, you're forcing a fast at the molecular level. You're not doing it by depriving food, but you're tricking the system. That's one way of thinking about rapamycin is it tricks the system into thinking that the animal is fasting and triggers all the responses that you'd normally get with fasting. So I definitely think what you're saying is true. But I think what we realize now is that you can't put the animal into a constant fasted phase. You need to have this kind of recovery. To make stuff, right? You break down, you have to make back. And so that's why I think the intermittent dosing is very appealing. And at the same time, it has this enormous benefit that probably, and this is almost certainly true, you're going to reduce potential side effects, right? Because other cells that are the ones that are getting hurt that cause the side effects, for example, the mucosa of your mouth, can also recover to some extent. So it's really a win-win.
But David, to go from a fed state to a fasted state, you can imagine maybe has benefits. But when you go from a fasted state back to a fed state, are there any downsides? Right? Because the regimen is you go from fed to fasted back to fed. So there's two curves there, fed to fasted, fasted back to fed. The refeeding, are there any potential? I mean, have we thought about the potential hazards of the refed state? I can think of a few.
Sure, but on the other hand, that's always going to happen, right?
Or you think in evolution it happened all the time, so we've adapted to that?
Well, it has to, right?
Yeah, I would argue, but
so David, I have a question for you, if I may interrupt just for a moment. Or for many moments. I'll probably do that more than once. Many of the people listening, certainly a decent percentage in Silicon Valley, will be asking themselves, what is the difference between rapamycin and something perhaps they've heard more of, which is metformin? How would you answer that?
Well, metformin is a drug. It's one of the most commonly prescribed drugs. I don't know if it still is the most common, but as you know, it's prescribed as an anti-diabetic drug. And I'm certainly not an expert in it. Nav knows a lot more about it. And the reason is that it's quite clear that metformin is an inhibitor of respiration. And the way it works is by inhibiting the mitochondria.
Now, in this case, what do you mean by respiration?
They say
Most people
oxygen
think
consumption.
breathing.
Yeah. So oxygen consumption at the cellular level. So, the cells use oxygen to generate energy, and the way they do that is using the mitochondria, and they use something called the electron transport chain. And metformin is quite clearly an inhibitor of the electron transport chain. And so, and I'll let Nav speak in a second, the mTOR pathway, we kept saying it sort of is turned on by food. But, food is obviously a complex mixture of many things, and it's composed of many different nutrients in it. And some of those nutrients, they contribute to energy, right, inside cells. And so the mTOR pathway, what's to me, actually, from a scientific point of view, has been always the most fascinating aspect of it, is it basically detects everything, amino acids, glucose, and it turns out energy. And so by inhibiting the mitochondria, which is generating energy, you're also inhibiting the mTOR pathway. And so you certainly might expect that there's a lot of overlap between metformin and rapamycin. And indeed, in cells and culture, if you treat them with metformin, you will also inhibit the mTOR pathway. Rapamycin does it directly by attacking mTOR itself, while metformin does it, as we say scientifically, much more upstream, much more in an indirect fashion.
What are the benefits or disadvantages of using one over the other? I should say, of course, when I mention people in Silicon Valley, they are using metformin for what they believe to be life extension properties.
Well, metformin is obviously been prescribed to probably hundreds of millions of people
Type 2
with diabetes,
diabetes.
and is generally considered to be a very, very safe drug. Rapamycin, as we were talked about, has been used more limitedly in a more limited fashion, and also has more potentially side effects such as these mouth ulcers, but as well as others. So I think the perception is that metformin is a much more tolerated compound. What I would say is perhaps if we think mTOR inhibition is a good thing, right, for prolonging lifespan, and I think substantial evidence suggests it is, metformin turns out to act mostly in one tissue, which is the liver, and then the effects in the liver have then secondary effects in other tissues. But rapamycin is going to act basically in all tissues in your body. It's going to get everywhere, inhibit mTOR everywhere. So the degree of inhibition of mTOR that you're going to get with those molecules is likely to be very different, just on the face of how we know how they work.
But one, so that's one difference between the two, obviously, as David stated. But the other one is because rapamycin directly inhibits mTOR, while metformin indirectly inhibits metformin and mTOR. So one key aspect of potentially inhibiting the respiratory chain, metformin would be the respiratory chain has a lot of other things. And so you can imagine that there are multiple outputs that are linked to the respiratory chain, and by inhibiting, including possibly mTOR, so by inhibiting the respiratory chain by metformin, you could be affecting 3, 4, or 5 other parameters, which might be quite beneficial. But the downside is it's restricted to its effects on a few tissues.
Yeah, and I don't think the studies, and Peter will know this much better than I will, I'm not sure there's lots of studies that really show metformin itself as a pro-lifespan agent. I think there are some. What captivated people's excitement about metformin is large epidemiological studies of diabetics using metformin or not using metformin and showing a pretty profound difference in cancer rates. That's what grabbed people's attentions with metformin. I think there's a lot of assumptions that it would have lifespan effects. Certainly it would, perhaps from reducing cancer, that would be one. But I'm not sure that animal studies have validated, like rapamycin clearly prolongs lifespan. In mice that I described maybe are a little bit artificial compared to free-living mice. But Peter, I don't know, has that been shown for metformin?
You're exactly right. I mean, there are half a dozen really good cohort studies looking at not just diabetic patients, but obese and insulin-resistant non-diabetic patients taking metformin and not taking metformin. So again, always important to point out the disclaimer. These are not randomized controlled trials, so you can always be fooled by confounders. But the relative impacts are strong enough. So I think the aggregate effect is something to the tune of about a 15 to 20% reduction in the incidence of cancer and about a 25 to 30% reduction in mortality or extension of survival in the presence of cancer. Now, the majority of the evidence for this is in breast cancer, only because that's where we have the most studies that have looked. But, it certainly appears that 2/3 of cancers may be impacted by this. Now, something we talked about earlier in the week.
So it you could argue perhaps positively affects health span rather than maybe lifespan.
But has the mouse study been done, for example? Does metformin prolong lifespan in a mouse?
Yeah, it was a Nature Communications paper from the NIH group, Rafael de Cabo, and it was interesting. I think they tried 2 different doses, as one was more beneficial than the other. I think one of them was not as beneficial.
So the question that I know we talked about this week, but it's I think remains still unresolved.
Just to clarify, I think David is absolutely right. Rapamycin clearly, I think the consensus is clear that it does increase lifespan, and as robustly as any compound that that's out there. But metformin, it's not so clear. I mean, I always tend to think of metformin for more of a health span, right? It's reasonable anti-diabetic drug, perhaps has some anti-cancer effects. At least the epidemiology supports that. And there's some other effects that people have noted with metformin in just terms of health span. And I think that's what has captivated people rather than just pure, increase in number of years, right? You and I have talked about this.
So I'm going to quickly ask a question of Peter, and then we can continue on this thread, which is definitions. Epidemiology, it's come up a couple of times already, but I'm sure there are people in the audience who are not familiar with that term. Could you describe what that means?
Yeah, these are basically observational analyses of data that were not gathered through the process of randomization. So in some cases, they can be really, really disorganized. In some cases, they can be quite organized, where you go back and get surveys of people to look at behaviors and things like that. So that's what epidemiology is. And sometimes epidemiology really gives amazing answers. One of the things we were goofing around talking about at lunch the other day was how no one ever needed to do a randomized control trial to show that smoking caused cancer. Now, that happens to be a very powerful example because the epidemiology demonstrated something called a hazard ratio that was very high. A hazard ratio is the ratio of the people who do the thing you care about and get the condition you care about to those who don't. And in the case of smoking, I think the hazard ratio was somewhere between 10 and 14x. So, when you look at the sort of godfathers of epidemiology, they would make the case that when a hazard ratio is above 4 or 5, the likelihood of a causal relationship is stronger. Meaning, epidemiology at best gives you a correlation. The problem with many things that we use epidemiology for today, like nutrition, is the hazard ratios are very low. They're typically below 2. And so you can't really infer cause. So that's always the drawback. And that's the problem with the metformin data, is the RCTs, the randomized controlled trials, which are very small, but they are happening right now, are looking at non-hard outcomes. So the 2 big studies, the one was out of Toronto, the one out of Oxford that came out about, a year and a half ago, Nav? They were looking at women who were recently diagnosed with breast cancer, who were in what's called a neoadjuvant window. So woman gets a diagnosis of breast cancer. She's about to start something called neoadjuvant therapy in a few weeks, which is therapy before she undergoes surgical correction. And in that window, they would give some women metformin and other women a placebo. And so it's a very short time to treat them. And these were studies that were tried to get at a question that I think Nav was sort of alluding to a minute ago, right? Which is, does metformin exert its effect directly by doing what David said, right? Going into the mitochondria, inhibiting complex 1, creating a lower ratio of NAD to NADH and interfering with the electron transport chain? Or is it an indirect effect by inhibiting the amount of glucose that comes out of the liver which keeps not only glucose lower, but insulin lower, presumably IGF-1 lower. And Nav, I think the consensus from those studies is we don't know.
Yeah, certainly mouse models that try to look at the cancer effects suggest that they are what we call cell autonomous, right? Nav did really the first of these, is that it's the metformin acting in the cancer cell itself that matters. But for these health span effects, particularly the glucose lowering, insulin lowering ones, it's almost certainly the indirect effects. So it's probably going to depend on what you actually care about.
And just, to be clear, there's not, unlike what rapamycin does, and largely thanks to David's work. I mean, I think everybody believes that rapamycin inhibits mTOR, right, David?
There's still some outliers out there, but
20 years later, there's still some outliers there. I doubt. Okay, there might be, but
There's still some flat world. people out
yeah,
there, too.
exactly. But yes, but with metformin, I think the cancer data, at least using laboratory models, does suggest that metformin inhibits the respiratory chain in the mitochondria, but there's not a good consensus on how it works as an antidiabetic. It has reasonable anti-inflammatory properties as well, and it's not clear how it quite does that.
Unlike rapamycin, which is highly potent, metformin not. And people wouldn't. So
Right.
drugs that typically work at high concentrations, people tend to find lots of potential.
There could be multiple targets of metformin to explain all these things that metformin does: anti-inflammation, anti-diabetes, anti-cancer. But I think David and I've talked about this before. I always say that the reason rapamycin works so well and because it can do so much is because it hits a protein like mTOR, which really sits at the heart of metabolism. Well, I would argue mitochondria, if you open up your textbooks, also sits at the heart of metabolism. And so one way to simply explain all the multiple effects of metformin is, what if it hit the same target all the time? Just like rapamycin hits the same target all the time. In this case, rapamycin hits mTOR, metformin hits mitochondrial complex 1. And that could explain all these multiple different effects. I mean, that's how the rapamycin, just to be clear, is hitting mTOR. Whether metformin works exclusively by inhibiting mitochondria is still an ongoing work in progress.
So let me ask a couple of questions of both of you. The first is, I'll start with just an observation. The friends I have who take metformin are very rarely those who, some finger pointing going on, very rarely, not always, those who can read the literature and understand the studies. So my question to you is, do you take metformin? Why or why not?
I do not take metformin.
Why not?
It's laziness.
What's that?
Laziness.
Laziness.
Well, because
yeah,
it doesn't have much side effects. So there's
Well, I generally think of metformin as a drug that is used for anti-diabetes, right? That's clear. It's been used that for a long time. All this other stuff like anti-inflammation, anti-cancer, that's still ongoing work. I mean, that's not, that all of that data isn't completely.
many people think though, okay, it doesn't. What's the downside? You could say.
Right. That's a different question, but I'm just saying for myself. And so I exercise, right? I play soccer still. I'm in my mid 40s. I'm as Peter will can talk about this, but the things that Peter likes to look at, I think I would say that I'm pretty healthy. So I don't feel, why should I take metformin?
What is the downside?
Well,
plus, one thing that has not been said here. We were once at a dinner with 20 or so people, and the topic came up whether anyone wanted to actually, live a very long time. And I have to say, I was the only person, plus a very small angry man who was there too. But Nav was not in that category.
So Nav did not want to necessarily extend life.
No.
Why is that?
I So David wanted to live till 600. I think that was the exact number.
Well, that's the number. Apparently, if you're immortal, you get hit by a bus at that point.
Right. So you've got another.
Those buses 600 years from now are going to be really fast.
You've got another 550, 80 years left. I think everybody has an internal clock that they want to get the most out of life, and I think about 80 years, maybe 90, no more than 100 for me.
Do you think having a lifespan, an expected lifespan of more than 100, would make you less sort of effective in your life because you would just see more slack in the system ahead of you?
Oh yeah, that's already happened.
But that's you, though, right?
Right.
Well,
I mean, the original 4-hour week guy, right? And this guy stole it from me, I think, I mean, it's clear. I mean, he's a little bit younger, so, that's...
David, how many scientists who you would consider credible, or people for that matter, who are just informed, take rapamycin for longevity purposes? Or
I think very few. I mean, obviously I have no real data on it, but I can tell you, so I've given talks and throughout the world on rapamycin, and it's not infrequent that when I put up a slide that shows some of the clinical effects, including immunosuppression, I will then have people at the end of the talk quite angry at me and telling me that by putting up that it's an immunosuppressant, which of course it's an FDA approved use, so it is an immunosuppressant. Peter gave it for kidney transplant patients. Will tell me that I'm now dissuading people from taking it, and quite angry saying, look, that you're doing a disservice because people who might otherwise take it now see that it may have this side effect. So clearly people are thinking about this. I probably know maybe 2 people that take it. And some of it is that it does have potentially more side effects. I think what we don't know is if you were to take it at these very low doses, this once a week dose, those side effects might be quite tolerable.
Up to what dose on a weekly basis do you think those side effects could conceivably be tolerable?
I think probably a couple of milligrams would be the range. The mouth sores is what, and you probably saw this.
Sounds miserable. I mean, I don't want mouth sores.
It's been described to me as having like a full, an entire cold sore throughout your mouth, right? Which is obviously not going to be so pleasant. But I do think at these lower doses, it's a much more minimal, tolerable thing.
Why would you not take it yourself?
It's a bit of a laziness thing, right? I'm not such a quantitative self kind of person.
Now, just to put things in perspective, also, we were talking about phosphatidylserine pre-bed to lower cortisol. Yeah. And David, you seemed very worried about phosphatidylserine. You were like, no,
it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it didn't make any sense. So actually, let's talk about this because there are a couple of things. No.
But I do, wait, just to be clear. So as people get angry, like David was saying sometimes after his talk, so people come up to me all the time and say, your friend David looks remarkably young, which he does, as you can see. I just tell him, he uses rapamycin.
Well, when I was
as a joke,
but I ingested a lot.
But the reality is, you might have been exposed to it as a young man.
That would be an incredibly intermittent dose, right? It would have been a dose over about a 1.5 year period, probably quite high, but never again.
You do look young.
He does look young, doesn't he?
Like an Argentine cherub.
Wow. That is not a good statement. Argentine cherub. But my parents actually look quite young too. But no, maybe all you need is one big bolus when you're young.
When you're young, early in life.
I mean, that's it.
I think that's the reason.
What would be the downside? Because I don't buy laziness. You're the guy who runs through the airport like 500 meters ahead of Nuff to maximize those 15 minutes in between flights. So I'm not sure I buy the laziness argument. Why not do intermittent low dosing of rapamycin?
I mean, some of it, the will is not there to figure. So if someone came and actually did some trial, if a Peter-like person did that and figured out some intermittent dose, which clearly didn't have a lot of side effects, yeah, sure, I would do it. But someone's going to have to do that, right? I'm not sure that I'm the person to experiment on myself.
So I want to come back to you right now, which is you mentioned, I just the phosphatidylserine argument didn't make sense to me for a bunch of reasons, and we're not going to dwell on that. But there's a lot of bad science out there, and there's a lot of bad reporting on science. So, Nav, I wanted to ask you about antioxidants.
Oh, wait. We'll get to that in 1 second.
Okay.
I just want to finish this idea as to why I don't take metformin or why David doesn't take rapamycin. And I think ultimately for us as scientists, and maybe this isn't for everybody, but for us, we'd like to see large-scale clinical trials done on these molecules, right? And what's metformin's been done over and over in large scale is in patients that are diabetic or pre-diabetics, perhaps. So, as I said, I don't, based on my diet, which is reasonable, based on my genetics, which diabetes doesn't run in my family, based on the fact I still play hardcore soccer, I don't see myself as a risk for diabetes, and that's the clear indication where metformin does have some potential efficacy. So why should I take metformin, right? Now, there is accumulating evidence that metformin might be a preventative for cancer. There, again, as Peter mentioned, some epidemiological data. There's some new data on anti-inflammation, but it's not like we've taken thousands of people, and there are trials people are doing this where we say one group gets metformin plus chemotherapy and the other group only gets chemotherapy, the standard care for some particular cancer. And those studies will come out and people will do it in, I know someone's trying to do this in lupus, someone's trying to do this with TB with metformin. And as these trials come out, maybe we'll get to the point where it will look like metformin is a reasonable, safe drug which has clear anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory properties, and maybe then I'll consider taking it. But until then, I just don't see.
I mean, it all
the
boils
evidence.
down to what we said before, right? Are these things helping either, chubby animals in a cage or diabetics that have a whole bunch of things going on? Are they going to help, the Peter Attias of the world? Who knows, right? That's what we can't tell you.
Do you take antioxidants? A lot of people
I do not. I do not.
Why not?
I thought there was no. Are there really good studies showing antioxidants? I thought there wasn't, right?
So the dietary antioxidants have consistently failed on these large-scale clinical trials that I just talked about that we all like to look at. So they've failed in infectious settings, like in the intensive care unit where people are septic. They've failed in cancer. If anything, in cancer, people who've taken antioxidants, it seems like it increases the cancer burden. So I don't think dietary antioxidants are, they just haven't shown over and over to have any potential beneficial effects. So why would you take something that, we've ran over and over and over? And so then the question becomes, well, why didn't they work? So logically, there are two reasons why they might not have worked. Right? One is that the antioxidants, the dietary antioxidants, they're just not very effective, right? The ones that are out there or in your general nutrition center, they're just, they're not made properly or they're not made potent enough to do what they're supposed to do, right? Which is to scavenge oxidants, right? That's what they're called, antioxidants. The second thing, which is much more provocative, is that perhaps the theory behind oxidants, which is always that, and they're sometimes called, also people call them free radicals, is that they're bad, right? And one of the leading theories as to why you age and why you get cancer and why you get diabetes and why you get neurodegeneration is that you just accumulate these oxidants, these bad things called free radicals. And therefore, if you take antioxidants, you suppress them, and by some miracle, everybody's going to be healthy. That just hasn't panned out. So I actually think the second theory that maybe this idea that oxidants are always bad is wrong. And so one of the things is that in every organism, going all the way back, including bacteria, archaea, throughout the animal kingdom, you can always detect the generation of these oxidants. And these oxidants are essentially hydrogen peroxide at low levels. And so nature has gone out of its way in every organism to make proteins that get rid of these oxidants, right? They themselves have antioxidant functions. There's tons of them in every cell, but yet you can still detect them. So there must be some advantage of having
some evolutionary function
of having these little H2O2 molecules
This
running
is not
around,
big soapbox.
right? It is my soapbox.
Big
but
soapbox.
And so myself and others have consistently found that these H2O2 molecules, hydrogen peroxide, at very low levels have positive functions. For example, we were talking about immunity earlier, right? And how you need a robust immune system to fight infection, especially as you get older. My own laboratory found that when you activate the immune cells, they increase the production of these oxidants. They generate more H2O2, and that H2O2 is actually necessary.
You remind me, what is H2O2?
Hydrogen peroxide. Sorry, hydrogen peroxide. So they make hydrogen peroxide not just as some waste product, but they actually use that hydrogen peroxide to function as a robust immune cell. And so if you get rid of that hydrogen peroxide, that immune cell doesn't work anymore. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which is fight infection. Right? So in other words, it's just like the rapamycin mTOR example that David talked about, that Goldilocks principle of biology. A little bit is good, too much is bad. And I think this is now gaining more and more acceptance in the biology community that, throughout evolution, we've selected to always keep a little bit of hydrogen peroxide because it has normal biological, physiological functions to maintain homeostasis. And of course, if you get to a certain threshold, it can cause damage to the cells and cause cell death or make the cell not functional.
So Peter, we were chatting about this at some point over the last couple of days, but on a related point, when I was chatting with a professor who I won't mention by name because she wasn't expecting to be on the podcast, but we're discussing high-dose intravenous vitamin C. And there are all sorts of clinics all over the place that do intravenous vitamin C, although but the difference is this woman is very well trained and doing it at an academic institution. And one thing that is done in many of these clinics that she does not do at all is a glutathione push, adding glutathione after the vitamin C, because what she emphasized to me is that the vitamin C, what someone would think of, most people would think of as an antioxidant, is actually a pro-oxidant in many respects. And she wants that pro-oxidative effect, precisely that effect, and the glutathione negates that. So that is something she does not do at her clinic. Nav, where did you grow up?
Where did I grow up?
Yeah.
You're going to get now the world tour, and you're going to get the word Himalayas multiple times. It's so funny.
You know that story. You want to say?
London.
Born
Miami,
in London.
Himalayan mountains.
I lived there for about a year, followed by living in the Himalayas for almost a decade.
Miami.
Followed by living in Miami in the 80s during the Wild Wild West.
Not participating.
Not participating, too scared to see what was really going on. But did have a huge impact on me. All of those places, including Miami. And then after that, I went to the University of Chicago to do mathematics in the late 80s. And then I've been in Chicago ever since because I fell in love with that city.
How did you end up in Chicago?
Oh, because I went to the University of Chicago.
No.
Yeah.
I understand. But I mean, you're in Miami. We were talking about 90s hair bands and all sorts of music from the 80s and 90s earlier. So you're rocking out.
Don't forget freestyle as well.
Yeah, freestyle.
Freestyle is one of my favorites.
So
I'm on record.
You're sort of at the tail end, maybe, or the middle point of like the Pablo Escobar.
You've been watching Narcos.
I have been watching Narcos, but the sort of the Pablo Escobar reign and mass exportation of cocaine into Miami. How did you end up doing mathematics at U Chicago?
Oh, it was clear. So in my high school in Miami, on any given day, you walk in and all you see is on the dashboards of every car, not every car, there's a little bit of exaggeration, tons of little white lines, right? And you have a choice. Either you participate and you see perhaps some of the end results of that, and had some friends which didn't clearly have positive effects. There were more acquaintances, but one in particular was a friend. Or you're so scared of it, you actually use that frightened experience of watching what's going around you, and you find something that will occupy your mind. Now, I still have a little bit of an accent. I'm sure people can tell this. I had a pretty strong accent coming out of India, right, with the whole head bobbing and the whole deal. And so,
which he can mimic. You should do the accent for people.
yeah, but not everybody appreciates that. Definitely.
I have a lot of Indian listeners. They'd get
Well, it's not what I don't like. What I love about the Indian accent is I find it quite a natural.
Who can probably do the accent is Peter.
Yeah, Peter. Well, Peter can do Borat. Yeah, you can do a good Borat accent.
We might have Peter do Borat later.
Yeah. But I've always wondered about accent. Like, why isn't the Indian accent a sexy accent? Right? Why don't people think of that as a sexy accent?
Why isn't that as good as Antonio Banderas?
Yeah, like why is like some dude who's got long hair? I mean, I've got long hair, but like why? If I have an Indian accent versus a Latin accent, why does the Indian accent not get the love? But that's a different story. But so it was clear. It was time for me to buckle down, and English wasn't going to be my strong suit. I mean, I can barely speak English right now. But what could be is math, right? And also, for those people who've done math is a great language. It is a language, right? Peter is a mathematician as well. Peter can maybe talk about this. I mean, math is a very logical, precise language. And there's something very nice about that, and attaching yourself to it. Having said that, by the time I got to college, and I thought I was a pretty good mathematician, math is the only subject I know you can reach a glass ceiling eventually, right? So my first year of college, got into a high math group, did okay, second year, third year. My fourth year, I'll never forget this. There's 5 of us. As you get a math exam, it's a take-home exam. Great. Hey, you get a week to do it. 5 questions. I stared at it for a week. I got maybe 1 question done. I turned it in, feeling like I'm going to fail the class. As afterwards, I realized one person did it in 1 hour, got all 5 right. Second person maybe did it in a few days, but got like 4 or something right. Another one struggled like me, got about 2.5. But that's a glass ceiling, right? There's nothing I could have done.
I mean, you just hit a point where if you're not built like Michael Phelps, you're not going to be an Olympic swimmer.
That's it, right. And I think this is a clear case of math. And also the other thing about math is it's quite lonely. You sit by yourself. You don't, because not everybody is at the same level. Biology, which I was doing just to make a little money in a hospital because they paid the best jobs. Biology is great because at the end of the day, it's an observational science. And David has much more insight because he's actually thought about this what are some of the key ingredients that makes a great biologist. But I would say one of the good ones is that it's an observational science, right? All 4 of us can be presented with a piece of data and we can have 4 different, not interpretations, but 4 different implications, perspectives. I mean,
it's like Rashomon.
Right.
Japanese.
The interpretations are interpretations. And so I always say, every schmuck can get a little lucky. There's something nice about it.
It's the story of my life.
Right, but in math, no.
Not much luck involved.
But as David, he has much more insight about what makes a great biologist.
Hold on. We're going to get back to David. But how did you choose your area of focus within biology? What did you choose? Like, how did you segue from math to biology?
Yeah,
that just doesn't seem like a hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah,
One day you're doing math, next day you're doing biology.
So I needed some money. I worked in actually a surgery lab. They actually paid quite a bit of money, and the surgery lab had a very practical goal, which was to preserve organs because it was a transplant lab, right? And Peter, who's an active physician, and we talked about it, and how making solutions that preserve organs before their transplant and is a big deal and continues to be a big deal. And so it seemed like, well, that's an important problem, right? You can see the implications of it. And so then you had to think about molecules, mainly metabolites, that would do that. And that got me hooked to metabolism. The other thing is metabolism ultimately is governed by one principle, thermodynamics. It's got some equations in it.
Yeah, for
Entropy, enthalpy, some of the people in the audience probably recognize these terms. And, so they're equations. And there's enzyme kinetics. So I did a PhD on enzyme kinetics. I never did any of the cool stuff that most of my colleagues did, which was genetics. In genetics, it's the world of DNA, which was clearly in the 90s very supreme, especially with the Human Genome Project by the end of the decade. So it was, it was an easy transition. It's not that, from math to doing enzyme kinetics. But one of the things I realized as I was working on metabolism, that the people who did metabolism, and I was totally guilty of this, just did metabolism for the sake of metabolism, right? In other words, in isolated systems. And it's probably maybe too long to talk about it, but the ultimate jump I made was to think about how metabolism now can regulate biology. That it just wasn't a bystander, right? And at that time, the dogma was it's all about your genes. Or perhaps what David was discovering, which turned out to be totally true, which is it's all about these proteins like mTOR, which are these kinases, they're called. They were at the center of the action. So it was genes and kinases, and metabolism was in the background. It's always there. It gives you energy. And so probably the only insight I've ever had in my own, throughout my career was perhaps metabolism wasn't just a bystander, right? It actually was a player, just like your genes, just like the kinases. It is part of the decision-making process. Whether you live, you die as a cell, you function for immune functions. As a stem cell, you behave like a stem cell, and that's basically the transition.
So I want to. I'm not going to leave you alone yet. So Peter mentioned earlier observational studies, epidemiology, correlation. This made me think of a conversation we had. We talked about it today, but I think the question that I asked was, what are the most important things that you teach your kids? Could you describe what you think is important?
Well, Peter asked me this, and then you asked me again. So
I never get it the first time.
I have 4, but thanks to Peter, I have a 5th. The 5th one, I think Peter has to explain, but I definitely I've written it on my iPhone notes. So the first is confidence, right? I mean, it's amazing to me how many people have fear of failure, right? Including in science. And one simple example that I always see is when it comes to grants. So people like me and David rely on writing grants to the government and other agencies. And a lot of times, most of the times, you get rejected. And so you've put all your effort in trying to write this perfect little grant, and papers, same thing. And the reviewers who say, no, not good enough. Now, there's 2 kinds of people. One person says, gee, I'm so bad. I don't know what to do. They go through a crisis. The other person says, you know what? Not a big deal. It's just stochastic. I just have to redo it, take the comments and move on. It's
what do you mean by stochastic?
It's just there's a probability. It's random event. It's
or there's a queuing.
Or
people who came first get it first. And then...
It's kind of like, I always tell people, and I've said this openly, and I'm not saying just to be cute on a podcast. For me, it's like, if you're at a bar, you only need one at the end of the night. And how you get there, and the males in your audience, which I hear are 87% apparently,
That's
we can
true.
relate to this, right?
True fact.
Either the first one says no, and then you say, "Oh, well, okay," or you just, you just keep on going. And I've always had that attitude. And people have told me I've been crazy for a long time, and they continue to. It doesn't bother me. So I think confidence is one aspect. The second one is your ability to write those grants, right? I mean, you do have to convey it in a manner.
Written
communication, right? Because they only see you in a written format. So that's very important. And the third one is the ability to communicate when you give the talks. Verbal communication. So written communication and verbal communication are are definitely 2 and 3.
What's 4?
Correlation versus causality. Right. This drives me insane. And I think this comes from the math background. So my favorite one is, and everybody, you go to a dinner party, people, especially in metabolism, once they find out, they say, I hear eating chocolate makes me live longer. I hear eating avocados is really good. I hear that, and rapamycin right now is, as we talked about, and metformin.
Sexiest girl
people say, I heard dogs are taking rapamycin and their dogs are like doing gymnastics. Okay. And, wait a second. The way we do clinical trials, and Peter can talk about these, they have to be double blind. They have to be blinded. Some get rapamycin, some just get a Pez, like a little pill. I mean, right? And then you have to see in a blinded fashion who did better or worse, not just us. And every single person, including my lovely mother, likes to tell me about her. She, by the way, is in great shape. And she'll tell me, I do yoga. Yoga is the key to living long. I'm like, but Mom, lots of people have to do yoga and not yoga who are in your age group with your demographics. I said, let's see what happens. So that's correlation versus causality. Now,
things that happen at the same time versus something that causes something else.
Yes. And then Peter told me a fifth one, your ability to distinguish between absolute risk versus relative risk. And within it is something called asymmetric risk. And I will let him explain the biology of risk.
Are we talking about you're teaching your children or lab members?
But all of those 4 things Anjali, my lovely daughter, I tell her all the time, correlation versus causality. We work on her ability to. A lot of people just obviously want good grades for their kids. That's important, but the
things are simpler than that.
But for me, it's the simple things. Is you got to learn how to write. You got to learn how to speak. You got to have some confidence instead, or confidence can be described as not having a fear of failure. And then the other one is correlation versus causality, which David, I think, you and I take for granted, but it is shocking how many people I know that I've come across who quite don't appreciate that last concept.
Aren't able to distinguish between the two. How do you instill confidence?
And then this risk.
Oh, no, we're going to get to asymmetric risk and all good things. How do you instill confidence in your kids? So we have confidence as one of the five pillars, number 1.
But it was number 1.
No, it's number 1. So how do you develop that in your kids, condition it in them, facilitate it?
David is a very confident young man. Go for it.
These were not my list. I don't think it's that hard. You just have to not care what other people think that much. I just tell my son, who cares? Don't be ashamed of things. If you want to do that, go ahead and do it. It's not that big a deal. Right? If you sort of criticize or make shameful things, then people lose confidence, right? I think the way not to do it is to praise everything, right? Oh, you did that. That's fantastic. You should write. That's definitely not the way it is. You let someone be original and not criticize them when they're original.
Wait, explain that to me. So you're not praising your kids all the time. So what are you doing instead of that?
My child's young, he's 6, right? And so they do a lot of wacky stuff, right? They're exploring the world and they get into trouble. They do new things. I try to make sure that whatever he does, is okay. Obviously, if he does something that's hurtful to others, I try to teach him a lesson from that. But most other things, it's okay. It can be something that they can learn from rather than it be, oh, don't touch that.
Can you give me an example? Because so you're not praising like, you're a genius. Let me give you a gold star for everything, which I think makes perfect sense.
Well, like for example, I like to curse a lot, Okay.
We all like to curse a lot.
So my son once in a while will hear a curse. And it turns out that once in a while he'll use them actually quite appropriately. And certain people in my family will quickly try to shut him down. Okay, and say, this is inappropriate. You shouldn't be saying that. Those are bad words. My approach is, look, that's a word. It's okay to use it once in a while when you have certain feelings. It's an appropriate word to use. It's a word you shouldn't use all the time, and maybe you shouldn't use it around all people, but it's okay. So it's not a criticism. It's like saying, you are still a young thing, and you're still learning what is the best approach to life. But what you just said is an okay feeling to have. And in fact, I actually don't like people who don't curse. I don't trust people who don't curse. It just shows a falseness, because everyone at some point
Wants to just say
wants
fuck.
to say fuck you, right? Or a bunch of other fantastic words. And so why should I tell a young thing who's learning from me that this is completely wrong? It just seems like an absurd type of thing. So that's one obvious example. Probably will get me in trouble.
So what else is on your what else is on your list, David?
I should say my son did once when I asked him different letters. He did say A is for asshole, which is really not a great thing.
And did he do that in school?
No, he did it with me. I was like, look, don't do that one.
Don't do that. in school.
Do Apple instead,
Did that
okay?
in school, and they called you in. How would you explain that to the teacher?
I would tell them that
The
I
same
think
thing?
cursing is good once in a while, and that he's learning, and that why should I shame him into using words that have a potential use? He
but
just
I-
needs to learn when to use them appropriately. That's all.
But what the key point that David hit on is this idea of failure, right? You only learn by failing, right? You got to work things out. Be original or unoriginal or whatever. You can put the definition, but you have to fail in order to succeed. I mean, this is such a cliche, but today there is so little room to fail because parents view their kids as a
Vicarious reliving of their
right.
lives.
Well, it's not only the reliving, as a judgment about their parenting. Oh, Johnny cursed. Well, therefore, David must curse a lot. Well, David does curse, but so what? Right? I mean, there's this correlation. And, what was that?
It's a true statement.
You're okay. But you know what I'm saying? So for me, confidence has to come from, a healthy dose of failure and being actually comfortable with failure. And the other one is being comfortable with conflict, which is another thing that gets whitewashed all the time, right? Like not conflict like physical conflict, but the ability to just banter. I mean, one of the reasons I really appreciate my relationship with David is there's plenty of discourse. As you two,
Because you talk so fucking much.
Dude, here we go.
You talk so much.
Here we go.
No,
It
but
went
can I
from being charming earlier in the interview.
Because I didn't realize you would
talks too much.
You talk so much, no. So, but the failure one, actually, one thing though, just about science, right? People tend to think that scientists are some of these sort of perfect beings that design experiments, do them, and implement them. What? And then they meant
you.
No, but I think what they don't realize is that most good science comes only after a massive amount of failure, and that massive amount of failure is required to do good science, right? If you're actually not failing a lot at science, it means you're not being adventurous. It means you're doing incredibly safe things that you could actually predict, right? And this is the ridiculousness of our granting system, is you write things in a way as there's no possibility of failure, with backup plans and these other ideas. And this
So you need to
hypothesis,
think incrementally to get the proper
to get the money.
grants.
But all of us try to do things that hopefully are going to be really new. But that means that most of the ideas that we have are wrong. They're just plain wrong. You have these beautiful ideas, and it turns out that Mother Nature decided that wasn't the answer. But it's okay, right? And so, but that's the hardest thing for young scientists, is that they go in with a certain kind of idea, and they do experiments, and they're wrong. And they do another experiment, it's wrong. And 10 times in a row, it's wrong. And so for me, when I think the things that make a good scientist and good child rearing are actually quite similar. To me, that capacity to get up and keep going.
We have a bartender singing in the background. That's okay. Continue.
Is actually the one of the most important properties you can have as a scientist, because the most thing you face is actually failure.
what advice do you give to the students in your lab or the people in your lab when they come to you for, say, career advice? What's the most common atypical advice that you give them?
I don't know if it's atypical, because I think we're all at good places that people tend to, I think, do things fairly well. To me, it's pretty simple. Just do something new. Like, if in science you just do two things, you will make a major discovery. If you do something new and you do something that's true, that's all you have to do to make a major discovery, because if it's true, biology uses it in many, many different things. The problem is that most things that people do are not new. They're derivatives of what's been done already with some variation. And sadly, in many cases, they're not even true, because they're just not. They're just not well done experiments. Experiments that
they're just sloppy.
They're sloppy, and it's noise, or it's not. One of the biggest issues in science now is that things are not generalizable. They'll do something in one system, and it may give an answer, and then that's sort of extrapolated to being true in many, many different systems. Well, it's not. It happens to be a little idiosyncratic case. So if you simply try to do something new, so that's what I tell my people. If you come to me and say, look, I read this paper and I want to do what's predicted by this paper, like, I hate you. Like, it's the worst thing you could possibly
Can you share your 1 to 10 rating system?
Oh, the ass crack factor? But that's for data, actually.
Oh, okay. So wait, what's the ass crack rating system?
That's just so I have a strong aesthetic sense, so I like data to be pretty, which is kind of ridiculous, because all it has to be is really true and reproducible. It doesn't actually have to be pretty. And some scientists actually
what makes data pretty.
Well, that it's symmetrical, that if it's an image, it's it has the right color, not skinny, symmetrical. I mean, we do a lot of things called Western blots, where there's little.
Oh, I know Western blots from Lyme disease.
Right, so little black bands. I like them to be about the same shape and the same intensity. I just want them to look pretty.
Pea size.
What? Pea size? No.
Wait, how is it that you were ripping on me for the staple thing?
Wait, hold on. We're gonna
we're
gonna get to Peter's staples. Hold on.
I'm not. But I'm very anal about these things.
Okay, so
if, like, people
start
start in the lab, the first few experiments they do have what I call a high ass crack factor, which is basically that the data is not aesthetically pleasing. It might be true, but I will not put my name on a paper with that data. So it might start at ass crack 10, which is the worst, or 7 or something like that. And I always tell them, get it to ass crack 3. Ass crack 3 is about the threshold that I will tolerate. Ideally, ass crack 1 is what you want.
So David, all right.
Send you some data soon.
No, you have a lot of ass crack data, but my lab does not. If you look at my papers, uniformly, we have beautiful papers.
Pretty data.
Beautiful data. And actually, reviewers always comment on that.
Miss Universe data. So, Peter, how should people staple properly? And what are the origins of this particular focus?
Well, first of all, this is one of the few things where the answer is known, right? So, I mean, so much of what we're talking about now, I mean, should we be taking rapamycin? Probably. At what dose? Not clear. Intermittent? Likely, right? How do you staple a piece of paper? That is, I mean, we know that, like we know what happens if you drop an apple from a tree. So the first thing that's essential is the paper has to be lined up perfectly. So you can't have like 10 pages stapled together where they're not aligned. Obviously, right? So if one's off by like half a millimeter or something, that's totally unacceptable. So the second thing is you always have to staple upper left corner, and it has to be a vertical staple. So a lot of people do this goofy sort of diagonal staple or some nonsense, even a horizontal staple. This is totally unacceptable. So it has to be a vertical staple. The next thing that's super important, the third factor, is that the upper corner of the vertical staple must be equidistant from the top edge of the page and the left edge of the page. And the ideal distance...
proper distance?
Yeah, proper distance is about 7 millimeters. But I would say, because I'm an engineer first, maybe mathematician second, I think it's okay to have a plus or minus on that. So I really think we're talking about 6 millimeters plus or minus 2. And so when you do... So because if you go too close to the left edge or too close to the upper edge such that you've lost that equidistance, you run the risk of tearing the staple through. The vertical, and again, I know some of people are listening to this and they're just thinking, I can't believe I'm wasting time listening to this, but I will tell you this. You do this, you fold your papers over, and you tell me that that's not honestly the best thing in the world, the best feeling.
I'm going to grab the mic here for a second. No, hold on. Now, who would you convey this to? And what else would you convey to them? What were the other tenets of functioning under the iron fist rule of ATIA?
I mean, this really, I think I've always had these tendencies. I think I've always been this way, but it flourished I worked at McKinsey and Company for a while, and I just found that it was a culture that really enabled that tendency, the obsession with fonts, spacing, stapling, clipping, like how you could make everything perfect. And I'll tell a funny story, right? So I had a team of folks that worked for me maybe in a previous life. I forget, like at a biotech company, I think, that I was working at many years ago. And they used to really kind of get annoyed with my tendencies, right? Of like, I mean, there was no stone left unturned. And I felt a little vindicated when someone who worked at that company went up to present something at Pixar one day and came back and said, Peter, it's sort of interesting. I used to sort of think you were an idiot for this obsession. But interestingly, at Pixar, when they storyboard, they have a very particular way that they do things, which is they put the pieces of paper up and they all have these clear thumbtacks, and it has to be 4 thumbtacks on each piece of paper. Each is 1 centimeter down, 1 centimeter over from the corner, and they do this thing. And so the friend of mine who saw this said, my question for the person in the room leading this session was, isn't Pixar one of the most creative companies in the world? How can you guys be so dogmatic about this one issue? And the person said, well, because we're so creative, we never want there to be a distraction in the room when we're undergoing our creative process, which is reviewing the storyboard. And I don't think up until that point, I don't think I'd been able to understand why I'm so obsessive about what seems like nonsense. But if I'm looking at a document, I don't want to be distracted by the staple being diagonal or the font being crappy or the spacing being off or any of those things.
What are your favorite fonts and sizes, and why?
Well, up until medical school, I refused to work with a word processor, so I only used a system called LaTeX, which is spelled LATEX. It's spelled like latex. And Nav knows what I'm talking about because any math idiot would have gone through this. So
I think Tim knows about latex as well.
Do you know about LaTeX as well? Yeah. So we use tech or LaTeX, and so you're.
I meant he knows about latex.
No comment.
So, so you write this code into a compiler and then you would create a format after it. And so the font in LaTeX that I found far and away the most elegant was called Roman. So this was a serif font. And then eventually it got to the point where you just couldn't share documents with anybody because people just wanted to use Word. And so I finally caved. Obviously, Word doesn't have exceptional fonts. But, I think there are a handful of fonts that are like borderline acceptable. Frankly, these days, my serif font of choice is actually Times New Roman, as pathetic as that sounds. On the sans serif side, I like probably the last couple months, because I switch every once in a while. There's a Myriad Pro condensed version that I'm working with that I find reasonable. I actually did font research one summer, which we won't talk about that.
Have you seen a documentary called Helvetica?
I have, and I actually find Helvetica LT45 to be a pretty decent font.
So, what about Comic Sans?
So wait, no, we're gonna get to Comic Sans. So my font of choice is Verdana 11. Long story, but so Comic Sans.
I love that one. That's all my talks are in Comic Sans.
No, they're not.
So it's so unacceptable.
I made that. I was making fun of you,
dude. That's
true.
That's pathetic. You know what that says? You know what that says?
Yeah.
It says I don't care.
I'm a child.
That says you're in the audience, and I want to visually insult you. I want you to suffer.
Are you suggesting I'm entitled? Is this an entitlement lecture?
It could be. It actually could be turned into my data are so good that I can actually insult you while presenting this, and you're still going to sit here and look at this Comic Sans.
I use Trebuchet for talks, but we use Helvetica. So in my lab, you better make figures well. That means Helvetica for the figures. And you know what
That's for the paper.
For the paper.
No. I'm talking about for talks. I don't use Comic Sans in the paper.
I hope not. But you know what I can't stand? When people make figures in PowerPoint, that's horrible. Like, you have to make them in Illustrator. Right, Peter? You need to draw in Adobe Illustrator if you're going to make a figure.
Yes. Although, for those
For the
geeks-
paper.
Yeah.
No,
What
he's
else?
talking about for presentations. No, for the paper, I completely agree with you.
You shouldn't draw anything in PowerPoint.
No, there's a really cool plugin for PowerPoint called ThinkCell, which is not for drawing, but it's for actually doing way better graphics. So you don't have to import from Excel.
People use Prism usually in science.
ThinkCell's pretty solid.
Yeah. No, for papers, I completely agree with David, but my verbal presentations,
But your fonts are like for the visually impaired, right?
Well, you're pretty visually impaired.
But they're like
You
ridiculous.
can barely see. I mean, you know.
So actually, no. So I've had a couple glasses of wine. So David,
You need glasses.
you don't have fantastic vision.
I used to until about a year ago.
Why don't you have glasses?
Because if I get glasses, I think that I'll be completely dependent on them. And then you have to carry these things
No,
around.
explain what you mean by that.
It means that
What happens if you put on glasses? Because now
so I tried someone's glasses.
I know Nav is sort of chafing your nuts about this, but you also decided not to have glasses.
Yeah, but I'm not visually impaired like
But
him.
I'm not
He's
either.
blind.
That's not true. When I'm tired, it's harder to read things. Look at the font size on your iPhone. Look at that. No, the other one.
So,
So I just think that once you start wearing glasses, your lenses, whatever compensation you're doing for the shape of your lenses with your ocular motor muscles will all stop. And you're completely dependent on it. And the idea that then you can't see anything where you really can't see anything and you need glasses is kind of scary for me. Where you have to have them with you.
become more muscularly,
Well, I think I don't remember
Dependent.
now, but you really, you don't,
physiologically
whatever,
dependent on the glasses.
completely. Right. And I've been certainly told by ophthalmologists that this is true. So I talked to an ophthalmologist, look, I can put you on glasses, but you'll be 100% dependent on them in a couple of months.
Do you think you'll lose your sex appeal?
Talking about it's more you have to carry something.
So, all right, I'm going to get this train back on the rails, or do my best to do that. How do you guys think of? Because a lot of people ask me about this Basis, the product Basis by a company called Elysium. Either
No.
He's your colleague.
I don't. I think these are territories that one should be very careful about. I think that I think their goal is to eventually look at this nutraceutical market and do things of high quality. I think there's some basis for NAD boosting it as connected to aging. I think there's been a number of papers that have shown defects in NAD. Whether that product has an impact or not, I actually have no idea, and I should say I have no position on it. You're the NAD, NADH person, right?
I have a clear position on it. Again, it goes back to why I don't take metformin, right? I told you why. If I am a diabetic or pre-diabetic, I would consider taking metformin, and because we've done large-scale clinical trials for that. Now we're doing large-scale clinical trials for people for cancer, and perhaps for anti-aging in a big, large aging trial. And until you do that for NAD, it's another interesting molecule.
But
I'm
not,
open
there's
to
got
it.
to be a lot of things you do that are not based on a clinical trial, though.
That's good. That was one of my questions that I might follow up
In
with.
terms of taking a drug, I personally don't. And do you? I mean, do you take anything?
I mean, once in a while I'll take a vitamin, I guess, but
So
I don't take any vitamin. I don't take anything. And I mean, but again, a lot of people would. I think this is what Dave is alluding to, and perhaps Peter can talk about it. Do you wait for large-scale clinical trials until you take a supplement or a drug? So I think, and I don't know any first-hand knowledge of it, but what I've read I think it was a New Yorker article, no, New York Magazine about Elysium. They sort of argued, they pushed back on this idea. Well, maybe it's too, you can't wait to do these clinical trials. How do you do it? It's an aging trial. We're talking about NAD supplements, Peter. And so I just think, even if you didn't do the clinical trial, let's say, I would at least like to know the biology of NAD. And I think this is a fair statement, and I'm happy to challenge anybody out there on this one. I think, thanks to David, we know, not only David, but largely, David clearly is a pioneer in this. We have a pretty good idea of what mTOR does, right? I mean, we have a reasonable, as things go in biology, right? And we know the inputs, what activates or not activate mTOR. We have a reasonable idea what mTOR itself, then, what turns it on and what does mTOR turn on, right? With NAD, it's not so clear. I think it's actually a great part of biology that people like me and David and many of our colleagues are quite interested in. What the hell does NAD do? And if anybody's going to tell me what it does, and they think they know it, you can look me up and come to Chicago and I'll buy you dinner so you can explain it to me, because I've thought a lot about what NAD does.
So this is a good question for Peter, since he and I both consume copious amounts of legitimate and probably partially illegitimate compounds for dubious purposes and sometimes scientifically sound objectives. Peter, what are your thoughts on how do you run the calculus on when to take a given compound? Because there are it seems to me, as a relatively scientifically illiterate layperson, but someone who tries very hard, that there are some studies that are just not going to get funded. And then there are studies that may get funded, but the results could take 5, 10 or more years to come in. In the meantime, if, say, for instance, you are me, Tim Ferriss, and you have neurodegenerative disease on both sides of your family, pretty much everyone, having a head start of 5 or 10 years could mean quite a lot. So how do you run the calculus on when to take something or not?
By the way, we didn't touch upon this, but I think you can squeeze this in with this discussion, which is about asymmetric risk, right? This is an example to the audience. I actually learned a great concept this week, which I sort of intuitively knew about, but thanks to Peter, who beautifully stated this over and over, and I think he's going to give an example of what asymmetric risk means by telling us when you should take a particular drug or a supplement and when not to, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think a lot about this concept of asymmetric risk. I guess just to sort of define it, I think it's self-explanatory, right? But it's generally a situation where the risk of not doing something or doing something can be far in excess to its opposite, right? So
talking about our caves.
Yeah, it came up so many times today. What was the most recent?
Climbing down.
Oh, that's right. So today we were on a hike, and Easter Island, of course, being formed by volcanoes, is basically just an enormous set of volcanic rocks, and so there's these really cool caves. And so our guide was taking us to this cave inlet, and it was basically just a 25-foot drop down, and it had a tree with one branch that you had to sort of shimmy down. The branch that you would, at the midway point, get some support of, looked like it could break at any second. And he was like, "Hey, do you guys want to go down there?" And I think it looked pretty cool, but
two scientists wanted to go, though.
Yeah.
That was the funny part.
Yeah. And my thought was,
You mean to go down?
To go down. Yeah, exactly.
You could have gone down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like,
But you're good at going down, right?
Bad idea to do this podcast with alcohol. So the point here was, what was the upside of going down? The upside was you got to get inside the cave.
You get boxed lunches usually.
The downside was that branch breaks, and or you slip, you break your ankle, you're stuck on Easter Island. It's a miserable day. So I just decided that missing the opportunity to go down that cave, which would be a cool story for me at that moment, wasn't worth the risk of the injury. So that's asymmetric risk.
So, David, I have a question for you, which is you're talking about your lifespan goal of 600 before you get hit by the hypersonic bus that will exist at such a point in time. If you are not taking rapamycin, how are you going to get to 600?
Yeah, let's just clarify. I said I wouldn't mind. Right. Well, many people said they would be sad. They see their loved ones die, all this stuff. I don't have any illusions. I thought like when I was younger that people would solve the aging question by now, but clearly things have gone much slower than I would have imagined. And even things like rapamycin would give you maybe 30%. Who knows, right? So, which I always find quite interesting is that given the fact that it does have these profound effects, there's still a lot more to go, right, in terms of what actually happens. So I have no plans right now, Tim, for that. I have no good idea.
At what point would you start taking rapamycin? Is there any given trigger or observation in your own life that would lead you, aside from a large-scale, randomized controlled trial that would definitively show intermittent dosing of rapamycin delivers X benefit?
Would anything that comes out of Matt's experiments convince you?
The dog ones?
Yeah.
I think if the dog ones, and I don't know what the dosing regimen they're doing, but the dog ones show an impact. My biggest fear is that it's not going to have a big impact in free living, relatively healthy animals. That's my biggest
a lousy fear. That just basically says there's not enough upside. The big fear should be, is there a hidden downside we don't see? And my view is that's a risk I'm willing to take because the upside is so high, right?
30%.
Yeah, although we have no idea what the downside is. Right. There's zero data.
Right. So the question,
decades of use.
The mental model here is the following. Is taking rapamycin picking up a penny in front of a bulldozer? Is it picking up a penny in front of a tricycle? Is it picking up a gold coin in front of a bulldozer or a gold coin in front of a tricycle? I think every intervention has to be viewed through that lens. Now, metformin, to me, is either picking up a penny or maybe a gold coin in front of a tricycle. I just think the downside of metformin is so low.
Metformin or rapamycin?
Metformin. I'm using metformin as an example.
Most people agree with you, right?
Yeah. So that's why I don't understand why Nav isn't taking it. But it's probably because he's too busy looking at Comic Sans font nonsense. Now rapamycin's different, right? I think the challenge now. So first of all, I'm convinced rapamycin is a gold coin. So we're not dealing with pennies anymore. The question is it a gold coin in front of a tricycle, in which it's a no-brainer, or is it a gold coin in front of a bulldozer, in which case it's worth doing, but you have to then, what do we talk about on asymmetric risk? You have to come up with ways to bracket the risk. You have to come up with early warning indicators of, is this going to be bad? And I think that's the reason I'm not yet taking rapamycin, but I mean, I bug David about this all the time.
Because the mouth sores.
No, mouth sores don't faze me because you stop the drugs, they go away.
Right?
It's the stuff we don't know that I think is the much bigger.
It doesn't have a 30-year history of people using it, like metformin.
It could give you cardiac disease. So, but I mean, to me, the most interesting use of rapamycin would be that you could do like a rapamycin holiday. And what I mean by that is you go somewhere and take like a 2-week treatment of rapamycin, maybe every 6 months or maybe once a year.
Spa.
Yeah, rapamycin spa. We're talking about maybe you do it on holiday. And if that would do the cleaning out part.
This is how I treat fasting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I'm doing
So
one
if it's
long fast per quarter.
Right. So if it's a chemical-based way of doing fasting, that I would strongly consider doing. The idea of having another pill that, I mean, I don't have any pills now, but if I had to have a pill to remember, I know it seems like one needs a mind a little bit like yours, where my life, I think, is more scattered than yours in terms of I got to take this, did I not take it? It seems a lot. It is really laziness.
So this is going to seem like a complete non sequitur, and it is a complete non sequitur. But since we mentioned it earlier, Peter, could you do a brief Borat for us of your choice?
The man and the horse.
Yeah, in Kazakhstan, we say that a horse is like a man. If a horse is sad, is like if a man is sad. And if a horse is happy, happy, is like if a man is happy. And if a horse is tall, is like if a man is tall. In Kazakhstan, we say if a horse is have foot, is like if a man is have foot. So a horse is like a man.
What does a horse like usually?
I mean, in Kazakhstan, you cannot go to a girl's father and trade cans of insecticide. You must do something called the dating. Not going to say that.
These are pieces of paper being passed around. So the man is like a horse is from, just to be for those people who want to look it up, it's from a bit that Borat did where he's at an equestrian event talking to this
Sacha Baron Cohen.
Sacha Baron Cohen, talking to this poor woman who just tolerates these. Go to YouTube. What should they search? A horse is like a man. This poor woman listens to like 3 minutes of these. So Peter, why are you so good at Borat? Actually, can you tell the OR story, please? The texts that would get sent to. So.
Yeah, so back in the day, we used these alphanumeric pagers, and you could either type directly into them. This was at Hopkins, yeah, or you could go onto like there was a server on the website, and you could actually just manually type in. And if your message was too long after X characters, it would get truncated, and you'd have multiple. Page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2, whatever. And so the first time I saw The Horse is Like a Man, I sat in front of my DVD and I typed them. This is, typed all of them up just so I could know every single one off by heart. There were like 20 of them. And then I would cut and paste it into the browser and text all of my buddies with it when they were in the OR, and it would get broken. Yes, the operating room. And it would get broken into like 6 pages. And what happens when you get all these text pages is the nurse in the OR starts reading them to you out loud. And so my friends
you're performing surgery.
That's right. So my friends would get these pages that would say, but of course the nurse, who probably had a Filipino accent instead of the Kazakhstan accent that Borat mimics, would just be reading these things out, and it didn't make any sense. And it was like, Dr. Ferris, you have a text here from Dr. Attia. It says that if a horse is tall, it is like if a man is tall. And if a horse is happy, it is like if a man is happy. And she would just proceed to read all of this. And I think that's probably a story I shouldn't have just told.
We'll edit that one out.
That's a Tim Ferriss exclusive, folks. You heard it here first.
It'll be a Hopkins retroactive investigation.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit. These are rapid fire questions that doesn't necessitate a rapid fire answer, so don't worry about it.
He cannot do rapid fire answers.
Brow face.
You can't do
No. He can do rapid fire questions. He can't
do rapid fire
answers, which is fine. The first is most gifted books. Nav, what book or books have you gifted most to other people?
I usually like to give at least younger people Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
Why is that?
It's a nice book about a journey of an evolution of a young man, young boy, teenager, young man into an adult. And that transition I still struggle with. And so it's a good read all the time.
It's a short book too.
That's the real key. Could use a few more pictures, but generally it's
This, and for those people listening, Siddhartha, and I mentioned this earlier when we were chatting, is probably in the top 5 or 6 most frequently given answers to this question. Josh Waitzkin, Naval Ravikant. There is a pretty long list. So for those who haven't read it, I think that is
so it's not original then.
No,
I didn't know that. I don't know who those people are.
It's a classic. I'm saying
no, but it I've actually I read it maybe 25 years ago, and it struck. But I come from that world anyway, so maybe I was programmed a little bit. For me, the experience is more important than the end goal. And I think that's one of the messages of that book. You collect experiences rather than objects and other things. And so it's about the journey and the experience rather than just plowing through it and getting to the end.
So-called objective. Just never the end, right?
Right.
What about you, David?
I tend to like historical fiction. And
too.
so some of the books that I've liked a lot and have given others have been Gore Vidal books.
Gore Vidal,
yeah, like Lincoln or Burr. So they're American history, historical fiction. So, got a lot of true history. So I like history, but they're a little bit, I don't know, there's a little bit of creative license taken with them.
What do you hope the recipients will get out of those books?
I don't think I've thought about it as deeply as Nav has. I for me, anything that I read or watch has to not bore me. This would be the number one criterion for me. And I find them fun to read, and that you also learn something from them. And I think in his case, they tend to also be very nicely written. So, Gore Vidal.
What does that mean, nicely written? How do you define something nicely written?
That the sentences are interesting, right? That there's perhaps more style. Like, for example, the sentences I like the most are kind of New Yorker type sentences, although they can drive you crazy. I actually like long sentences that are incredibly well crafted, so there's no confusion out of them. Some of the New Yorker ones are like crazy, but like when you look at them, you're like, they're quite masterful. Some aspects to that. I also like when there's a variation in sentence structure, so it's not one type of style.
You like Salman Rushdie?
I don't know if I've read much. I mean, there was Satanic. Was that the
Satanic
verses? Yeah, I think I tried reading that one. I don't know if I read much more of his. I mean, lately I've been more on that historical.
You like his ex-wife? You met her, right? You met her.
I met her once on a Top Chef filming.
Yeah.
For
she's Indian. That's the only reason I brought it up.
Anyhow, Nav. So I sometimes read sort of more like Roman historical fiction or American historical fiction. Nav. It's always a one-track mind.
So Nav, if you could if you had a huge billboard or could have a huge billboard anywhere, what would you put on it? What would it say?
I like women.
Don't smoke.
Don't smoke.
It's a public health.
All right.
Wait. Speaking of don't smoke, did you ever see? This was on Twitter like about 2 months ago. It was a great billboard. Yeah, that's true. What am I talking about?
Yes.
It was actually it was probably one of the best billboards I've ever seen. It was a Canadian like anti-smoking campaign, and it was a quote unquote pro smoking billboard sponsored by a funeral house. And it was like a fake funeral house. The funeral house was actually like this not-for-profit. I think it was anti-smoking. And of course, I'm not doing it justice. I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was like certainly top 10 billboards I've ever seen.
What would you put on your billboard, David?
I think I might put like either of two things. Something like an interesting artwork, something that was really pretty to look at, but depending on what the background was, or like make it seem like there was like a forest or something that started like there.
So forest. All right. So we chatted a little bit about this, but if you were, thank you, Peter. If you had to give a TED Talk on a topic outside of what you're known for or a subject area, what would it be? And I know I'm cheating a little bit because we chatted about this.
I mean, the thing that I like a lot besides science is like plants and gardens. So it'd probably have to do something around that, but probably more about why I like it rather than any kind of deep knowledge of it, because I think
Why do you do it?
Why do I like it?
Yeah. Why do you like it?
I mean, a couple of reasons. I think.
And what type of plants?
Okay, so I don't like flowers. I mean, there are some flowers I like more because of the aroma, but I don't get like attracted by a rose. I like plants that have like interesting bark or leaves on them, and they're a little bit different than others. I just like how they look, and I like the fact that they're calm and sort of intelligent in some way. I've always liked like Japanese gardens. I know you spent a lot of time in Japan. That has always inspired me. There's a certain piece about a garden that I don't get ever from like people or other stuff besides like this freak show here, right? That there's something very peaceful about a garden that I've always really wanted to be able to spend time to create a garden that I would really like. I don't have time, and I live in an expensive place, so I have a tiny little garden. So I tend to collect somewhat strange plants.
Like what?
Like, for example, there's one that I like a lot, which actually I think I saw one here as we were driving around. It's called the monkey puzzle trees from Patagonia. It's a
monkey puzzle tree.
That's what it's called.
It's an incredible name.
I think its Latin name is Araucaria actually, which is, it's actually related to Norfolk pine, which you also see around. It's a tree that has these sort of spikes on it. Were we in Glasgow together once? We went to the botanical garden there, and I showed it to you. Or that was someone else. No. Anyways, I like trees a little bit different from where I live. It goes completely against this trend of trying to go native, right? So I should be getting New England wildflowers, but it's not the
That's
type.
what you meant by native.
So what about you, Nuff? If you were going to teach, or not teach rather, but give a TED talk on something outside of the subject area or areas you're known for, what would it be on?
I think it would be on the concept, and maybe it's a cliche, but I don't think it is. The idea that every relationship you enter into, the premise should be mutual beneficial. So some people argue, I'm altruistic, right? That implies it's only one way. Some people say I'm selfish. That applies the other spectrum. And I think both of those are not at least healthy. So I'm arguing clearly against selfishness, which is obvious maybe to people, but the other one is altruism, right? And I think the best ones are mutual beneficial, right? And that's something, maybe it's cliche, maybe it's obvious, but I think if you think about it, most of us are taught to think about one or the other, right? So the goody two shoes are all like, oh, I need to be altruistic. Oh, it's all about you, not me. And the selfish people are like, well, being a little selfish allows me to create interesting things and make the world eventually better. But I think within any given situation, there are ways to do both. And David and I have talked about it, just how we run our own labs, right? And David can speak about this much more eloquently since it's late at night. But I think the concept of mutual beneficial is something that I talk about openly with my people in my lab or people in general. I think it's a concept that is an important concept that perhaps is obvious, but maybe needs to be explicitly stated.
So let's segue to something I view as maybe related, which was a conversation we had on the beach yesterday. In fact,
although it's not clear how this podcast is mutually beneficial.
Wait a second. What do you mean? It helps me, but it doesn't help you? You can ask for anything you want. This is like a genie bottle that you can rub and
actually, this is mutually beneficial, right? Because you have your podcast, and I'm just having a good time, so I am benefiting from having a good time.
Some nice wine. So we were chatting yesterday, and I observed, and not to claim that I know David very well, but I said, well, David, Peter, and I tend to run pretty hot. Not a bad thing.
You guys are hot guys?
Meaning we're ready for the Thunder from Down Under auditions. No, that means that we're a little. We run hot temperamentally. And I asked you, have you always been this even keeled? Because you seem very even keeled and very calm in most circumstances I've observed you in. Could you perhaps repeat and elaborate on your answer?
So I would say till the age of 22, no, not at all. And I found myself quite unhappy, and actually very unhappy at one point. And I sort of pulled, just to be funny here, I pulled what's called one of my great shows, Seinfeld, George Costanza. So if people remember George Costanza, in a Seinfeld episode, like nothing was working for him, right? Like he was just like, and one day he decided, I'm going to do everything opposite. right? And I say this in a joking way, but I did. I used to. I mean, as you can tell, I've gotten older. Will probably lose my hair eventually.
You've got quite a bit of hair,
but I've got quite a bit of hair, right? And I always had it a little bit on the long side. But if you take up pictures from my high school, college, as a kid up till 22, I had very, very short hair. As my lovely wife likes to say, "Oh, you had the Dunkin' Donut boy haircut." What she describes it as. And then, I just, for whatever reason, said, you know what? I'm going to grow my hair long. Like, that's just one example. I mean, it's a very superficial example. And so after that, literally, I did many things opposite from what I used to do. And slowly, it just, I got to this point.
What was the catalyzing moment or conversation or dinner, whatever it was, at 22? Like, why did you change your ways? What was the setting or the moment or anything?
It was nothing in particular. It was just simply that I was I was unhappy with what I was doing. And
what were you doing at 22?
Oh, superficially, I was doing all the right things, but internally, I was unhappy, right? I mean, look, when you're an immigrant, and Peter's also an immigrant, he can relate to it. You have your family that comes from a different country has expectations that are expectations based on, like, you're still back in your own homeland, right? But you haven't grown up there since the age of 10, essentially. And now you're 22. So you spend actually more time in the United States and you feel like much more of an American at some level. Of course, you still retain certain key aspects of your Indian heritage, your Himalayan Indian heritage. And so there's that internal conflict and how you settle that. And from that internal conflict, probably creates some sort of uneasiness and unhappiness, lack of confidence, perhaps even, and insecurity. And either you just stay in that perpetual state, and I know plenty of immigrants, and Peter can probably also comment on this, who stay in that perpetual insecurity of not knowing where they belong, or you start to make some firm decisions. And I started to do that. And one of them was that, this isn't working for me, whatever I was doing. And there was just that anger about am I Indian? Am I American? There are books written about this sort of subject. And once I decided, look, I'm going to be in America. I like certain parts of America. I like certain parts of India. And I started to solve that sort of stuff. I realized that one of the things that I really like are people. I really like people. I'm afraid of dogs, but I like people. A lot of people like dogs, but not people, right? So I like people, and I started to engage people at a deeper level, and I get satisfaction from that consistently. And that just made me a happier person and a very tolerant person. And from that, you probably notice a sort of a not running so hot. And also made me less entitled, which is key.
What were some of the decisions you made aside from growing your hair out that stand out to you as memorable or important, either?
And it'd be interesting what David thinks about this. I actually think everybody's interesting. You just have to get it out of them. That I did not have an appreciation growing up. I clearly, was kind of like, sadly, winners, losers, that kind of thing, right? And I just, I think everybody's got their own interesting story. Most people probably aren't enough self-reflective to even, and this is maybe judgmental, that they can articulate their story, but it's there. It's just a matter of getting it out.
Teasing it out.
And I think that's what your podcast does, essentially, from what I can tell.
Yeah. No, that's definitely the goal. So, David, there's a common expression in Silicon Valley, but elsewhere it's become very widespread, which is you're the average of the 5 people you associate with most. You spend a lot of time with Nav. Why are you guys friends? Well, why do you continue to spend so much time together? I wish there were cameras here.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question because I unlike Nav have a harder time. I have. It takes me a while to actually like someone. and I frequently accuse people of being potatoes. This is a term that we use quite a bit of someone.
Potatoes.
Like just boring. Like if you see him coming down the hallway, you run into the bathroom to get away, kind of thing. And you know, sadly, and I do agree with Nav. I think that's probably not a true statement. But I have less, and as you've noticed, I'm very impatient. I have less patience in pulling that out of someone. I think what Nav and I share, and I think is also not so common amongst the interactions that we have, is we're very open. And you could say it's not intimate, obviously in a physical way, but intimate sort of like that you just share. Trust me, Nav, it's definitely clear with me. But just that one can be open and frank. And I think you and Peter are also.
Yeah,
right? Like,
for sure.
And that's a really great quality. I think so many people always have a facade, particularly people who are quite prominent. And in our world, in the science world, you know, we interact with lots of prominent people. And there's never kind of like knowing who that person is. There's always what they are rather than them. And that's why people get upset at me because I just say whatever I think, right? And Nav does that too, right? And it doesn't necessarily always make you the best friends of others, but I really appreciate that about him. The other thing I really like is that we treat each other just as two dudes do. It's not a like, what paper did you publish and what did you discover and how many people are in your lab? And this is what scientists tend to say, like, did you see that cell paper I had? Or I have 25 people. There's just a lot of that competition stuff, which maybe matters at times, but we don't have any of that between us. And it's very rare that happens. And when we talk about science, we just talk about science in like pure science, like what's interesting, what's true, what's not true, not in that kind of more, I don't know, scheming way. That
it's
perhaps.
Not a jockeying. It's
Definitely not a jockeying. I like him for who he is. He likes me for who I am. It's not that I need something from him. He doesn't need anything from me. And a lot of times that's not quite the case. I mean, we also have obviously other friends, and we actually are part of probably a group of 5 or 6 people that end up at similar meetings throughout the world that we interact with quite nicely. But I like that kind of sort of frankness that he has, and I think he appreciates my frankness as well.
Well, I've asked some guests on this podcast. I'm not going to do it because I think the answer is really obvious, at least in this case. Who do you rely on to tell you when you're wrong? And I'm not going to say you guys tell each other when you're wrong, when each or the other is wrong, but just the level of bickering has been so fantastic to observe. It's nonstop. It's great.
Look,
but it's not a competitive. If you guys were alone, just the two of you, you'd be having the same conversation. It's not a posturing or a political chess match. It's like just the like pissing contest.
People call it sometimes the David and Nav show. And we provide entertainment. We'll be at a big dinner table and no one's talking, and we entertain all of them just by arguing. Right?
And not on purpose.
No, and I think I said this earlier. Maybe I didn't. In case I didn't, I'll just say I remember Nav and I were talking, and you said something along the lines of, I bet you weren't expecting us to be such dumbasses or something like that, which of course is not the case. I mean, I feel like I've needed Wikipedia and Google and a glossary to just feel able to tread water in a lot of these conversations.
No. That's how David and I feel with Peter.
But I said, you know what? I feel like I've stumbled into Dumb and Dumber meets Limitless, and I think that's a pretty good analogy.
He calls me dumbass in front of other people. Like he'll scream across from dumbass, come over here.
You call me douchebag a lot.
I call you douchebag.
All right, Peter has a mouthful of nuts and wants to talk.
No, I was going to say
nuts in his mouth.
I know, it's ridiculous. You know, one thing that has been awesome this week that it's unfortunate can't be captured in this podcast. 2 things. One is all the inappropriate discussions. So that is what it is. That's the limitation of it. But the other thing that I have found incredibly fun is the totally nuanced scientific discussions that have taken place in one of the most beautiful places I've ever been on this planet, right? So it's really cool to be sort of sitting I don't know, on a cliff overlooking the Pacific where you're really in the middle of nowhere and really trying to figure out if it's the ratio of NAD to NADH that matters more, or the activation of AMP kinase, and coming up with thought experiments. And so,
Are you going to fast for 5 days or 20 days?
I mean, what's the most important question I think we've bantered about this week has been, how can you measure autophagy? How can you clinically measure autophagy? Or with the mTOR integrator? I mean, like, freaking one of my favorite problems on the face of the earth. It drives me crazy. And I just think that that's kind of been the, not just the highlight of the week, but I think when you have people in your life that you can have that kind of complete discussion, you can have that discussion with, and you can immediately interchange between complete and utter bullshit. And that, I think that's that's the whole.
And then it's a back and forth, Peter. We unfortunately meet many people who are highly intelligent, but many people want just airtime and to give a lecture. And that drives me back and nuts. We all have gone back and forth, argued, have different ideas. That's awesome, right? That's like having a non-potato relationship.
Can I just elaborate just for 2 seconds, which means 2 minutes, on what David said? It's difficult as you get older. So I think this is definitely a function of age, but also within your own field as you sort of rise through the ranks. And then it's like, who do you trust that, or you feel comfortable telling you when you're off your rocker, right? And I think it's important to have that. And, I'll give you one quick example, which goes back to this idea that low amounts of hydrogen peroxide perhaps have H2O2 have beneficial effects, right? And nature has selected this idea. It's a new way of thinking. But David is actually my biggest critic on this idea, right? So a lot of people, say this is kind of an interesting way, maybe explains a lot. And David says, yeah, it's very interesting. It's, blah, blah, blah. However, how does it work? So in other words, okay, so you think H2O2, everybody says you put enough peroxide on cells, or if they accumulate enough, it can damage. And the chemistry, you can explain that. It oxidizes lots of things, DNA, lipids, and it's bad. That's an easy concept. But the concept that H2O2 now has specific proteins that it acts on, maybe even mTOR, which David once had a paper on, how does that work mechanistically? Like, he's done beautiful mechanistic work on showing what mTOR does. How does peroxide work? And I think, for that idea eventually to really take off and make a huge difference for public health is what I got to do. And nobody hits me harder than David does, who's, my best friend in science easily, right? But privately and publicly, also a big critic, but not I agree with them. This is what my lab has to do over the next, 5 years at least. That's a fair statement, right?
David, how old are you now?
48.
48. Jesus, you do look young.
I told you.
Holy shit.
The dude takes rapamycin. I know he does secretly.
So, David, what advice would you give to your 30-year-old self? And place us where you are, what you're doing at the time.
So 30-year-old self. So
you could choose 30 or 20, 25. Yeah. It's up to you.
So I did an MD PhD at Hopkins, same institution that Peter was at, although a little bit earlier than you were. And then I decided not to do clinical work, and I decided just to do research. And so I needed a job. But I decided to go for these sort of independent positions where you could kind of get a little lab on your own. And I went to this place called the Whitehead Institute, where I am now, which is affiliated with MIT, to start a little lab there and eventually join the faculty. So that was basically when I transitioned to Boston, I guess, when I was 30. It was really, really anxiety producing to have your own little lab just coming out of your PhD and frankly not really knowing what I was doing. What would I have told myself? I probably would have told myself, yeah, I worked like crazy. Like, I think it's fair to say that's the only thing that I did well. I probably would have tried to be a little bit more what Nav described himself as. So this is clearly at a later age than him. But I didn't, one thing I never thought much about, and probably haven't even until much more recently, is the kinds of relationships one wants with people. I think I did those relationships in the easiest ways possible to sort of optimize my capacity to do work and do experiments. And that probably in the long run, I think I wish I would have thought more about that in terms of, well, what does it mean to have a good friend? What does it mean to have a girlfriend? You know, what's your relationship with your parents? I don't think I ever thought about relationships in any kind of serious way other than they exist. And there's some things you get from them.
Have to be tolerated.
I think so to some extent. And I don't know why that was, but it took me...
Potato or not potato, right?
No, but at that time, I don't think I gave people even the time to fall into those categories. Anyway, I wish I had thought more about that.
Do you think if you'd had that conversation with your 30-year-old self and taken the foot off the gas a little bit with the work focus, do you think that would have precluded the progress or advances you made over the subsequent, say, 5 years, or inhibited?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I've been always a ridiculously impatient person. It's my best quality.
Would you have willingly made that trade-off?
No, probably not. But maybe if someone had said, look, these things, if you think about them now, have an impact much later in life, maybe I would have, right? I mean, I could have done some cost-benefit analysis. But certainly back then, I would have seen things as a distraction, which is how I did see them. I was just really impatient and couldn't help. I still am really impatient. I cannot stand to be in a line. I can't stand walking out of an airport with Nav. He walks so slowly. He drives me insane. He'll be in the back of the plane. He's like a person who allows himself to be put in the back of the plane. He's fine with it. Right. So like our flight from Santiago, he was in the last row of the plane.
All by myself.
How does that happen?
The beauty was there was nobody around me. And I had the whole 3 seats to fall asleep in.
Anyways, but I think that's what I would have said. Give more intelligent thought to relationships with people, just like you're giving to your career.
What about you, Nav? 30, 25, 20.
Yeah,
you pick the age.
So I think I think mine is almost the opposite, right? So up till the age of 22, it was all IQ, right? No EQ, right? Emotional quotient, and which is what David's talking about, versus IQ.
That's not what I'm talking. I actually have a fantastic emotional quotient.
No.
I can. It's more about my own relationship.
Right. But I'm just.
What do I want?
Yeah. No. Thank you for clarifying that. But I'm just sort of putting them into two categories. You know, your intellectual work versus relationships, and I'm just sort of broadly classifying them as IQ and EQ. And that's not an exact term. And I think till the age of 22 is all about being a math guy, probably having some of the characteristics that David said, but for whatever reason, it didn't make me very happy, and so I probably spent those years, well into my 30s, working on relationships and sort of being more well-rounded. But at the same time, that probably came at a cost, right? I mean, I think David and I talk about this all the time. And when he says what he just does, I push back and say, dude, that allowed you to do certain things that were incredibly insightful and important for biology, right? And in some ways, I feel like I'm just playing catch up, not to David, I mean to my own self, right? I mean, I know what I have to do, right? I know the experiments, I know the questions. I think I'm reasonably intelligent and I have good scientific taste. I know what the right questions are, but I'm kind of playing catch up. Now, can you play catch up when you're 46 years old? I don't know. I hope you can. So, did I lose some time by working on myself? In relationships, there's no right or wrong, right? It's the journey. I mean, if I had to do it again, would I still do it the same way? Yeah. right? No regrets. You can't. It is what it is. So there's no right. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we get along so well, because today we probably have a similar view of what we want going forward, right? We've arrived at the same place in many ways, but from completely different approaches based on a variety of factors. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, for sure. What, Nav, would you view as the best or one of the best investments you've ever made? And by that, I don't necessarily mean stock investment or something like that. It could be an investment of money, time, energy that was kind of speculative at the time, right? So, for instance, a guest on this podcast, Amelia Boone, was on the law track and invested $450 in her first entrance fee for something called World's Toughest Mudder, which is an obstacle racing competition. And now she's the best female obstacle course racer in the world. So it opened up a million doors, but at the time, $450 was a big stretch. Does anything come to mind?
Oh, yeah. So I have a dirty little secret. You said the 4-hour work week, and I joked that, I invented that. And I've been teasing our good friend Peter about how efficient he is. My best quality by far is how efficient I am. In a week, I go through a schedule of, running my lab, traveling, being with the wife, being with the kids, is going to rooftop with friends, playing soccer. I do a lot of stuff. Doing things for the university, for the scientific community. It's just not only one thing. I do like 10 different things. It's all in a meaningful way. And the reason I do it is because I have a very strict, regimented mental, thanks to the calendar as well on the iPhone, and where everything is accounted for, right? I have a huge list of things I want to get through in a week, and it's all accounted for mentally in this. And I still get reasonable amount of sleep, usually about 7 hours. I purposely became efficient in graduate school because I saw most people including some of my own graduates, I don't understand why they come in at 10 o'clock. I really don't get it. So in graduate school, I realized I love soccer and I want to play soccer every day. That was around 6 o'clock, our games. I got in as a graduate student, which is unheard of, by 7 or 7:30. And I used to party way late in the night. It didn't matter. I will always get in, and I just cranked. Right? I didn't want to work 15 hours, come in at 10, stay till 3, and brag about how I stayed till 3. Well, you started at 10. By 11:30, you were already at lunch. At 1, you finally set up. It wasn't very efficient. For me, come in at 7:30, just crank through. Usually by 6, I would be done on most days. I think you were talking about a very smart graduate student that you have currently who seems to be very efficient and who's very successful, who's been able to do amazing work, but he's very efficient about how he likes to go about many things he does within the lab and outside the lab. And I think, but for me, it was again, I spent 12 years from the age of 10 and 22 sitting in a library doing math 18 hours a day and watching the world go by me, right? So my reaction was, wait a second, I can spend 18 hours and get nowhere. Maybe I should do the George Costanza movie. Maybe I should just work for 9 hours, my butt off. That way I have enough time to go play soccer, go watch the great Michael Jordan and the Bulls every night on TV in the pub. You know what I'm saying? And so I got very good until this day. Even when I'm at meetings, as David knows, we have I plan out dinners. I actually organize many meetings, but at the same time, I find time to have dinner with friends and stay out late. Be social, get up in the morning, still give a talk, ask questions. It's a conscious choice of living and being efficient.
What are some of the biggest differences between, or what are some of the most common mistakes that inefficient people make in your mind? And that could be people in general, or it could be people sort of within your field.
For me, it's very easy. When do you give 110%? And when is just good enough?
So for you, how do you think about that?
When I have to give a talk, it's 110%. It's about 25 minutes usually, right? Sometimes 45 minutes, right? it's an insult to maybe the Comic Sans is an insult, but at least the data is insulting if it's not presented in a manner for the 50 or 500 people that are listening, right? It's insulting that you're just going to get up there and bumble your way through. You got to give. But there's a lot of stuff that we're dragged into where people, as David said earlier, just like to talk all the time about whatever. They schedule a meeting for 2 hours and want you to be there. I'm like, we can do this in 30 minutes. I know we can. Why are we here for 2 hours, right? That's inefficiency. So I'm very clear about this is what I bring to the table. Well, if you think this is a benefit, again, mutual benefit. If you think this is a benefit, because this is all I'm going to give you, because I don't think you need more than that, take it or leave it. And I'm at a position where I can do that. But most people, they think by spending more time in anything, like it makes it better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy.
It's just not the case.
It's just not the case.
Yeah. There's something called the Mythical Man Month in the world of software development, where they say if you have a software project that is behind schedule, if you double the number of people working on it, you effectively double the delay. It actually makes it take longer.
Right. And so, believe it or not, as a kid, I worked my butt off, much more harder than this, because my father said nobody died from working hard. That was our motto. You look back, that's really bad advice. Okay. I mean, yes, you want to work hard, but I mean, people do die from working too hard. Let's be honest. And so, it's more about working efficiently. So I teach my daughter constantly how to prioritize what's important, especially as kids. They think everything's important, right?
Are there any particular questions that you ask your daughter to help her prioritize? Or how do you instill that?
Oh, for me, it's really easy. Honey, does this have to do with confidence, ability to write, causality, correlate, right? It comes down to, the same sort of
The
principles.
pillars, yeah.
Right? So for me, like being good at math is really important. Maybe that's just me. Being good in her history and writing classes is good. Some other classes, these days they give you so much homework. They have some crazy touchy-feely classes about visual this or whatever. I'm like, kid, if you got to it, you got to it. It's not a big deal, right? You don't have to be A at everything. But there's a few things. It's not even being A. Do you really understand, geometry? Do you really understand how to construct what David was saying, sentences? My wife, luckily, is very good in English. She has a romance, languages, and literature major originally. And so she's very good at helping her construct and find her voice as a writer, right? So, I mean, you try to work on the real stuff.
David, in terms of your best investment or best investments that come to mind, you could really think about them as decisions, allocations of time or resources.
Yeah. I was thinking as Nav was talking, I guess I've never really thought them as investments, but certainly the best decision I did was not pursue clinical medicine.
What is clinical medicine?
Well, be a doctor and see patients and work in a hospital. I mean, that when I was an MD PhD student and I finished my PhD, and this was after the mTOR work, and I, was confident I had done something that mattered, and I went back to the hospital. There was a lot of pressure to continue in that world. My parents, my mother in particular, and in general, it was. Nowadays, I've had several students, several MD PhD students of my own, not pursue medicine, but at the time it was actually not as common, and not doing that and staying just with the research side, even though my mom said, you're going to starve, you're not going to have money, you're not going to have food. Mothers worry about those things. I think she had very low expectations, because she said, if you do an MD, if you do your residency, you do an internship, at least you can go to some small town in the South and they'll take you as a doctor.
Twin Peaks style.
Exactly. But that was probably the best decision I made, and it was one of the hardest ones.
How did you make that decision? I mean, you had your family on some level doubting the decision.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come to make the decision?
It was. I think it was pretty simple, actually. When I went back to the hospital, and you have to do what are called rotations, right? You do different services. You do medicine, surgery, OBGYN. I found myself, when I was talking to patients or reviewing their cases thinking about my own scientific work. And I thought that that was really wrong, right? It's one thing to be a bad scientist, which there are many, but to kind of be a bad doctor, not really care, is really bad, right? It's really terrible. And I realized I was going to be a bad doctor. I was not thinking about this person. I was thinking, how soon could I get back to my lab bench and do an experiment? And that's just bad. And I definitely avoided certain work as a medical student that I should not have avoided. So that was it, right? And I think right? It's like whether you like someone, you don't like someone. It's you really do know that feeling, and you just have to sort of convince yourself. And here it wasn't that hard because it was sort of unethical to be interacting with a patient and not giving my 100%.
I mean, it's in a way fortunate that that moral conundrum existed, right? Because it assisted in the decision.
It assisted tremendously. My advisor, Saul Snyder, also was like, look, David, there's people used to also make the argument, if you do the clinical stuff, you'll get paid more. This is a very common argument because MDs make more than PhDs. I remember him telling us, like, don't pay attention to that. That's, it countered my mother's kind of argument. But it was really that I was treating patients without giving the full attention of my mind. And that seemed fundamentally wrong.
I forgot to tell you, one of the reasons I was also unhappy was that as an Indian male, I was thinking about your mother, they wanted me to be a doctor, right? So I was doing math, and I took all like physics and math and all this hard stuff, which you don't get very good grades in. And eventually I started like biology. Oh, good, you're going to become a doctor. So I don't know if you even know this, David. You know how many times I applied to medical school? 3 times over a span of 2022, and after even my PhD. The guy who now heads Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital, arguably one of the 2 best cancer hospitals in the world, a very famous scientist, physician, and a mentor, a good friend, both of David and I. We see him all the time, Craig Thompson. And he even went straight after the PhD to the dean and with my dossier, and this was like right after the OJ thing. He goes, now if you're like OJ Simpson, and you have to have a Hail Mary to get away with this because they care about grades, right? And so I didn't have great grades because I did math and physics and all this stuff, right, just for learning, and so I didn't get in even the 3rd time, right? So I tried, and maybe it was a good thing, right?
Blessing in disguise.
A blessing in disguise. So that was part of the other failure.
Well, it comes back to not fearing failure, right? Right, sort of conditioning yourself against that. So Peter, I want to pass the mic to you because I think we have maybe a good ending story as we start to wrap this up. So I'm going to pass the mic.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to believe. It is, in 24 hours, we're going to be out of here, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Sort of a bummer. This week has gone by fast. I think the only regret I have was that Ajay wasn't here. I think who's Suren's son. And actually, yeah. So Suren was the gentleman who did, the majority of the work on identifying what it was in the soil that they found here at Easter Island in 1964 that it was so special. It was this bacteria, purified it. It was rapamycin. And one of the more interesting stories. So first of all, it's kind of interesting how I met or got connected to his son, which was I was on another podcast telling us discussing a little bit about rapamycin, and mentioned that I knew that Suren was dead, but that his son was still alive, and I wished I could connect with him somehow. Somebody heard the podcast who knew him, told him, and he connected with me through LinkedIn. And then that's when I got telling him about this trip, and he made a pretty big effort to come. He told me some interesting stories that I think one is worth sort of closing with, because it brings back to this question that, frankly is front and center on my mind, which is, when can I start taking rapamycin? How much should I dose it? How often should I take it? Because I'm not sure I want to wait until 20 years from now to know the answer to that question. And so in the late 90s, Suren presented with metastatic colon cancer. So that's a pretty unfortunate presentation. That means that you're not only diagnosed with colon cancer, but at the time of diagnosis, the cancer has already spread to the liver, completely to the liver, which is the first place it usually spreads. And so at that point in life, at that stage of a diagnosis, your life expectancy is really short. It's, again, it's hard to know exactly because I didn't see the x-rays, but it could be 6 months, it could be a year, but it's not a long life expectancy once you have that. And he decided to start taking rapamycin. Now, this was even before rapamycin was approved. Rapa was approved in 1999 by the FDA, but again, for this very specific indication around kidney transplants. But he started taking it because, of course, he had a reasonable supply of it. And he took it for about 3 or 4 years. And during that period of time, none of the tumors grew. None of them shrunk, but none of them grew. He was in completely stable situation. And he, this is all according to his son who told me the story, that, he decided he was never going to know if rapamycin really worked unless he stopped it. So he stopped it. And sure enough, as soon as he did, the tumors basically exploded throughout his body. And within 3 months, he was dead. He told his son on his deathbed that, he sort of regretted this. And it was the biggest mistake he ever made was not taking it. And so I think it was like maybe 10 days ago, I emailed Ajay and I was like, do you remember what dose of rapamycin your dad was taking? And he's like, I don't, but I bet my mom will know. And he emails me back an hour later, and I forwarded you this email, and I forwarded to you as well, David. He said, I can do one better than that, Peter. My mom still has some of it in the freezer. And he sent me the photograph of the prescription, because by the time he was at the end of his life, it was already post 2000. And so this drug was already on the market. And sure enough, you have the little, it was like a Safeway or Vaughn's pharmacy thing, and it's got his name on it, and it's rapamycin, and it was 1 milligram per day. And so, I think so to me, this kind of this week has been unbelievable. I think the thing that's sort of funny this week about is like finding out that plaque is gone. One of the first things David said to me when we planned this trip was, we can't wait to see this plaque. There's a very famous plaque that is sitting on a stone at the outside of the crater where they found the bacteria. And the morning we were going to go, we were like, there's some good news and bad news. The good news is we now know where the plaque is. The bad news is it was
because online you couldn't find where it was. It was just a picture.
Just a picture of it, and you couldn't know where it was. And the bad news is it was stolen in 2011. So we went and saw the rock that once held the plaque, and
you could see where it was. But
you can see. Yeah, it's so anyway, I think our hope is that, and we're trying to figure out what the right way to do this is, but is to sort of collectively put that plaque together, send it back to the folks here, and have them put it back up, and maybe add something to it, because the plaque was already, obviously a tribute to this, but I think there's probably a bit more that could be said.
So just to wrap up, and I loved getting that email. And do you remember my response? 2000 question mark, exclamation point. So just in closing, I'd love for people to know where they can find you guys, if they can find you guys. And you are hard to find, as it turns out, because you're not on social media, except for, it would seem, a potential Twitter account. We'll come back to that. We'll see.
I think it was a joke account.
If you can recall the joke account that was made that may at some point be active.
That was the account we made. I'm in a meeting as a joke. A friend of mine made an mTOR Man Twitter handle and started just tweeting nonsense, which a lot of was erased because it was sort of making fun of some of the people at the meeting, and they asked me to erase part of it.
All right, so you may be able to find, and I'll try to correct this in the
old
show
people
notes.
like us use email, right?
At mTORman, you probably don't want to give out your email address on this podcast.
But our email addresses are trivial.
There are other people who have done that.
Right.
Exactly.
This is not difficult.
So yeah, all right. So you can find their email addresses, but let's start with that actually, David. So people may or may not be able to find at mTORman on Twitter.
I think it still exists because I keep getting people keep asking me whether to follow me, even though there's nothing been put on it in years. But
Okay, all right. So people may be able to reach out through that avenue. Otherwise, is there a particular website or otherwise where people can learn more about your lab?
yeah, I mean, if one just searches my name and puts
David Sabatini Lab.
Whitehead Institute, they'll find the website.
Whitehead
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or I think if you put Sabatini Lab, it probably goes to that.
And Nav,
Same thing.
Same thing. You just put
what should they search?
my name, Navdeep Chandel, and it'll pop up, Northwestern University.
Navdeep, Navdeep, last name Chandal.
DEL.
DEL. There we go.
But I
This is-
think Google will fix that very quickly. He's good at that.
We'll sort it out.
Yeah.
His name is pretty unique, actually. There's not other people.
Is that right?
And last question is, do you have any asks, suggestions, or recommendations for those people listening? Any requests that you would like to put out to those people who are listening to this podcast? Anything whatsoever, really.
I think,
really a shame we don't have a video here.
I mean, something that Peter and I have talked about is I do think there's going to have to be a new era of sort of molecular nutrition where one understands nutrients at a much deeper molecular level in an integrated way. And it's clear they have a major impact on our physiology. And a lot of this we've known for a long period of time. But how they all combine to affect many different systems over long periods of time under different situations, a lot of that is really unknown. And it's not really clear how we're ever going to know it because a lot of studies would have to be done in people. I think it's worth starting to think about that. Many places dismantled their nutrition departments. MIT used to have a nutrition department. In fact, when I first arrived, it still existed. They were actually, good or bad, responsible for a lot of the food pyramid. Places dismantled their physiology departments. Those are things that I think we have to start thinking about. We've done so much at this sort of deep molecular biochemical level. Going back and integrating this in a integrative fashion, I think is going to be interesting. That's what I would say.
Nav? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think I concur with David. One of the things that does perturb me sometimes for an even keel kind of guy is that everybody's an expert on diet and nutrition and metabolism. It's amazing to me, right? When people talk about genes and genetic information, and I'm talking about the larger public, people sort of go, well, I'm not quite sure how genes and DNA, RNA, I don't even understand that. But when it comes to metabolism, diet, nutrition, all of this stuff, everybody is the world's expert on. And, it's as complicated as learning about genetics. And it takes a long time to figure out at a deep level what metabolism means, how it works. And like David said, diet and nutrition, I mean, I don't know much about it because I think it's in its infancy. It needs really a revamp. And so I would just tell the general public to treat the world of diet, nutrition, and metabolism perhaps with the same sort of respect that they have for genetics, and not try to just, tweet out stuff that they may think based on anecdotal evidence is true, correlation versus causality.
Skepticism, right?
And have skepticism and have the same scientific rigor. And I think one of the things that I've enjoyed talking with Peter and yourself is that you guys do sort of think about this from a very, you use the classic scientific method in trying to decipher what metabolism and diet and nutrition really mean. But I think most people just don't. They think we're world's experts on it. And I'm like, spend a whole lifetime doing this stuff and still feel like I'm in the dark.
Right, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. Facts
Well stated.
Facts. Peter, any final parting thoughts or any questions you'd like to pose to the universe / my listeners?
Well, I mean, a lot of what we talked about this week we didn't get to because I think it's probably more technical. But I think the really interesting stuff here is, and it kind of actually gets to what Nav's point is, right? I mean, one of the things that keeps me maybe keeps me up at night is too strong a statement, but it's what certainly frustrates me is that we don't have a great way to evaluate, for example, different protocols that are used to mimic caloric restriction, right? So called intermittent fasting. And we can all agree on why that would be beneficial, probably something to do with autophagy. We don't know how to measure that. Right? We can measure it at a point in time, maybe do a muscle biopsy. But, to me, one of the most exciting things we talked about this week was what would it take to put together even a small N of 1 or N of 5 experiment where we sort of shotgun this thing and look at what are the metabolic signatures of autophagy that can then allow us to have a tool to evaluate dietary strategies that go beyond hard outcomes, right? Because hard outcomes mean you got to do studies for 20 years, look for people who live, die long. Those things just aren't going to happen. So I think we need to come up with a new way to think through this problem. And I don't know that I have an ask at the moment, but I know I'm going to.
Peter, where can people find you?
Nowhere.
That's not true.
Kazakhstan.
That's right. I'm in Kazakhstan. I have a Twitter handle that I use occasionally, and I blog once or twice a year.
That's extremely nebulous. Any further instructions? Eating Academy?
Yeah, just Google my name and you'll find some.
Okay. Peter Attia, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for the time, guys. And to everybody listening, there will be show notes, links to everything that we discussed at 4hourworkweek, all spelled out.com/podcast. And as always, and until next time, thank you for listening. Signing off from Easter Island.
Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number one, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it.